Good evening. I'd like to call the special call meeting of the Milton City Council for Monday, July 18th, 2016 to order. Sudi, if you'll please call the roll and make any special announcements.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. On behalf of call roll for the July 18, 2016 special call meeting, I will waive the reading of the rules and general announcements. I would like to remind those that are in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. Additionally, those attending the meeting who would like to provide public comment during the call for public comment, you are required to complete a public comment card prior to speaking on the item. Those called to speak will be taken in the order that the speaker cards were received by the city clerk staff prior to the beginning of tonight's meeting. All speakers will identify themselves by name, address, and organization if applicable. As I call roll this evening, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Joe Lockwood.
Here.
Councilmember Karen Thurman.
Here.
Councilmember Matt Coons.
Here.
Councilmember Bill Luss.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Longoria.
Here.
For the record, Councilmember Burke Hewitt and Councilmember Rick Moore are absent. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Sudi, if you will please call the first item on the agenda.
Our first item is approval of the meeting agenda. Agenda item number 16155.
Okay, do I have a motion of approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion for approval of Councilmember Thurman, second from Councilmember Longoria. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimous. Okay, next item is public comment. I believe
We
no
do
public
not have
comment?
any.
Okay. We'll, you're gonna fill out a public comment card? Okay. All right, public comment is a time for citizens to share information and to make sure this is general. This is general public comment?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Public comment is a time for citizens to share information with the mayor, city council, and to provide input and opinions on any matter that is not scheduled for its own public hearing during today's meeting. Each citizen who chooses to participate in public comment must complete a comment card and submit it to the city clerk. Please remember this is not a time to engage the mayor or members of city council in conversation. When your name is called, please come forward and speak into the microphone, stating your name and address for the record. You will have 5 minutes for remarks. Okay, Susan, please call our first speaker.
Our first speaker is Mr. Tim Becker.
Okay.
Good evening, Council. Tim Becker, 15625 Canterbury Chase. Last week, one council member found it necessary to attack me in the Milton Herald. If his goal was to intimidate me into silence, he failed miserably.
Mr. Becker, I'd like to not call out particular council members. If you have general
I
comment.
didn't call out a council member.
There's only one that did it.
Okay. I would actually be remiss if I did not respond.
Point of order.
I,
He wants to respond, let him respond in the same media that I responded to him.
Is that-
Mr.
Again,
Lutz,
Other than honoring the rules with respect to not identifying and calling out individual council members, I do think they get a general right to speak.
Right.
Okay.
I found it ironic that I was accused of inaccuracies, misstatements, and errors of omission, given the outright lies that litter this letter. While there were numerous lies in the council member's letter, I will focus on 4 unequivocal and verifiable lies. First, the validity of the Milton Coalition petition was questioned.
Well, it's obviously becoming personal at this point. I think there just needs to be an admonition that cannot be personal and can't accuse a council member of what was.
Mr. Becker, if you don't mind, if there's some facts on your position, that's fine.
Okay, well, I'll try and... So, the first thing that I wanted to say is that there was some doubt that was cast on the veracity of signatures. It was stated that many of the petition signers were anonymous. This is not right. At the 20th of June council meeting, I submitted a petition into the public record. There was only one person who signed the petition with the name anonymous, only one person. So I urge that council please look at the petition that I submitted. Second, it was contended that the community septic system was designed by a registered Georgia professional engineer and approved by both Fulton County and the Georgia Environmental Protection Division. This is not correct. No community septic system design was included in the June 20th City Council packet, and to my knowledge, none exist. I think that it was likely that they were referring to the yield plan, which is unrelated to the community septic system. The fact that this has been confused is shocking to me. Third, it was contended that 32 acres of preserved land were to be placed in the Oconee River Land Trust. This is not correct. Nowhere in Brightwater's home rezoning application was this arrangement mentioned. Furthermore, I have read the letter drafted by the Oconee River Land Trust. It merely states that the land trust intent was to move forward with the project to further evaluate the possibility of a conservation easement. The intent of the letter was to provide the land trust understanding of the project and provide information on the land trust process. The letter was not even countersigned by Brightwater Homes, so it does not rise to the level of a letter of intent, much less a contract. No binding agreement was ever reached with the Oconee River Land Trust. Lastly, the land trust letter specifically expresses concern about the impact of community septic infrastructure and whether such a system, in their words, is consistent with a conservation easement. Lastly, it was contended that conservation subdivisions are not developer promoted. This is incorrect. At every public meeting on conservation subdivisions held since November, developers and their lobbyists have spoken in favor of conservation subdivisions. The Atlanta Home Builders Association even sent a representative to advocate for conservation subdivisions.
Mr. Becker, you have 1 minute.
Okay, not one developer has spoken in opposition to conservation subdivisions. This is a fact. While I was repulsed by the letter, I take comfort in knowing that the response was a realization of a citizen awakening in Milton. Milton citizens are more engaged than ever. Last week's letter is proof that you can no longer dismiss and ignore citizens. Please know that attacking and bullying citizens will also not work. Citizens will not be silenced, and I certainly will not be silenced. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Is there any other public comments?
That's all.
Okay, we'll move on to new business. If you'll please call the first item.
First item is consideration of the approval of a waiver of potential or apparent conflict related to Gerard and Davis LLP's limited representation of Fulton County in relation to various items between Milton and Fulton County, to include the pending T-Splost intergovernmental agreement, an ordinance authorizing Fulton County to conduct Milton elections, and the conclusion of the service delivery strategy arrangement. Agenda item number 16156, Mr. Ken Gerard.
Mr. Mayor, do you want to see if there's any comment on this one first before we begin?
Do we have any public comments?
There is none, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, at the last meeting of the council, that you were good enough to indulge me as we walked through this issue with respect to, I believe that one may have been Pond and Company, and I think we had a fairly healthy discussion, which I appreciated having with you on why I do these. I do these candidly in the effort of transparency and accountability I think my bar rules require. In this situation involving Fulton County, my law office, Gerard and Davis, has been retained by Fulton County to represent them in a single piece of litigation at the appellate level involving the City of Atlanta on an annexation matter. It does not affect Milton at all. We also are, from time to time, requested by the Fulton County Law Office to provide opinions with respect to annexation issues. However, once again, we obviously keep a sharp lookout to ensure those do not involve the City of Milton. On this evening's agenda, however, there are two items. Well, maybe it's not on this evening's agenda, but I know there are two issues in flux. One of them is the T-Splost intergovernmental agreement between Milton and Fulton County, as well as every other metro jurisdiction in Fulton County. We also have been working on the ordinance involving the Fulton County conducting our November general election. That's another matter that I'm reviewing. And of course, although it's been dormant for years, there is of course the service delivery strategy wrap-up that will have to occur. Therefore, it is appropriate that I come to you and disclose these things. And that's one of the reasons that I do this, is I want to tell you about them out in the open and indicate to you, I heard you loud and clear, and I will repeat what I said last week, that I do not perceive that I have a conflicted interest from the standpoint of not being able to zealously advocate for the positions of Milton. However, I do this because of just the dynamic and the context and the optics of it. If I ever believed that there was truly a conflict of interest where my ability to represent Milton was marginalized, I would not ask you for a conflict waiver. I would simply recuse and recommend that you get separate counsel. But in light of the fact that I'm not there on this at all, I would request respectfully that you authorize this waiver that I put in front of you.
Any questions or comments on this? If not, I'll open up for motion.
Mayor, I move that we approve agenda item number 16-156, the waiver of potential or apparent conflict related to Gerard Davis.
Second motion.
I have a motion by Councilmember Longoria for approval, second by Councilmember Locke. Any discussions on this? All right, hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Sudi, if you'll please call our next business item.
Our last item at this special call meeting is consideration of an intergovernmental agreement for use and distribution of proceeds generated by the 2016 Transportation Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax Referendum, agenda item number 16153. This was deferred at the July 11th, 2016 regular council meeting. Mr. Carter Lucas.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this is the formal IGA with Fulton County for the collection and distribution of the potential T-SPLOST funds that would go before the voters at the November 8th election. This agreement establishes the distribution of funds based on population. So Milton's share would be basically 6.49% of the funds received, which if we got to 100% of the estimated funds would net $36,967,635 over a 5-year period. So this is the formal IGA for your approval tonight if you choose to be a party to the T-SPLOST project. Thank you. I'll answer any questions you have.
Any questions? Anybody? Sudi, do we have any public comment? I think I have. I may have asked. Do we have any public comment, Sudi, on this? No. Okay. Okay. If there's no questions, I'll open up for a motion.
Mayor, I'll move to approve an intergovernmental agreement for use and distribution of proceeds generated by the 2016 Transportation Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax Referendum, agenda item number 16-153.
Second.
Okay, I've got a motion for approval from Councilmember Lusk with a second from Councilmember Coons. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Okay, that'll conclude our special call meeting. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. All right, want to welcome everybody to our July 18th, 2016 work session. Work sessions are a more informal setting to update the council on business items. No votes will be taken on work session items. Tonight, there are 4 items on the agenda. Public comment is allowed that is germane to each agenda item. If you wish to speak, you're required to fill out a public comment card and turn it into the city clerk. Public comment will be allowed for a total of 10 minutes per agenda item and no more than 2 minutes per person. Public comment will be heard at the beginning of this item. Once the item is called, no other public comment cards will be accepted. And also want to thank the Planning Commission for being here with us tonight. Are there any public comment cards for agenda item number 1?
Are we going, we're in the CPAC, so. Peyton,
I'm sorry, did I?
Yeah, do you want to call these out,
Planning
Sudi?
Commission. I'm in CPAC, I'm sorry.
Sudi, you want to?
So our first public comment related to the joint elected officials and CPAC meeting is from Mr. Patrick McHugh.
Hi, my name is Pat McHugh. I live at 145 Oakhurst Leaf Drive in Milton. I wanted to make 2 points, one specific and one general regarding the comprehensive land use plan. And first I wanted to thank the committee for their work, and for the meetings I've attended, they've been very receptive to input, so I appreciate that greatly. My first point is I live in the Brookshade subdivision. There is a rezoning and adjacent property that's making its way towards City Council that, if approved, will dramatically change the density of a neighboring property, and myself and our neighbors are opposed to that. So we're very sensitive to the work with the land use plan and how that plays into land use density for undeveloped properties. And we've given specific input in asking that the current reclassification of Brookshade, Vickery, and Hopewell Close be changed from the current classification in the plan to from an MDR1, or excuse me, MDR2 to either MDR1 or LDR. I look forward to further discussions on that. My second point was more general in opposition to actions that unnecessarily accelerate the density of land use development. I think population growth and land development is the largest challenge that's going to be facing Milton in the next decade. It'll strain our resources and infrastructure and even the best case of that development. I don't believe there's any justification for accelerating that through rezoning to higher density property for land usage. And I ask that those items be considered not only in the land use plan, but any other activities regarding impact to rezoning or future land use that moves from a lower density to a higher density. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So do we have any more public comment?
We have one more from Miss Laura Bentley.
Hi there. Laura Bentley. Y'all can hear me, but we can't hear you, so speak up when you speak. 2500 Bethany Church Road. I want to thank the Citizen Committee. I know that there are a lot of other things that you probably would like to be doing, but from another citizen to a citizen, thank you. This is so important. I want to thank Ms. Councilmember Thurman for taking a lead on this. Our comp plan is what the citizens look to when there's confusion and chaos. And when things are unclear, we want to be able to look to a plan and rely on it. I have some fairly detailed comments, and so I've made some page numbers that I just want to go through ahead of time. The first one is under the category, and I have to say, if I could request in the future, if there could be a red line version, it would be very helpful, because I'm not sure where the changes are and what the data changes were. I missed a couple meetings, so forgive me if I'm off base with some of my questions. It was a little bit hard to follow. Development patterns in land use, page 18. Under issues, there's a bullet that says widespread opposition to typical high-density development patterns limit the density, the diversity of housing options available in the city. And I agree with this. Opposition is usually based on high-density developments being in violation of the comp plan. So that's my question. It's a statement, and I hope it tracks to policy number 1, which says, let's just not violate the comp plan, okay? So I'm not sure if I have that understanding correct, but that's what I hope that means, is that it's a statement that's an issue that tracks to that policy. Under development patterns and land use, page 18, opportunities, bullet number 6, preserve the gravel roads in Milton, period. Okay, along with larger lots, minimum 3 acres required on gravel roads as part of the special character of Milton, as well as including this asset as part of the transportation plan for the city. So that says to me in our comp plan, we don't want to pave gravel roads. It's an asset to our city, and we want to regulate it with the most restrictive density interpretation. So I hope that you all pay attention to that. I was glad to see that that was carried over from 2011 to 2016. Development patterns and land use, page 19. Policy statement number 6. We will be open to land planning and development concepts that may be new to our area but have been tried successfully in other places. Okay, so I just want to be sure that if that's referring to a CSO, that I'm pretty sure we've gone through that process, and I just wanted that language to be looked at a little bit closer. Also, I handed out the CUP rezonings. It's a piece of data that I think Councilmember Lusk had circulated, and it has 22 CUPs that are listed. And I just wanted to make sure that the CPAC committee understood that we've only approved 2 CUPs since we became a city. So they were used a lot before we became a city, and we became a city so that we didn't have to do things the way Fulton County did them. And I think that based on what we learned from the Ebenezer rezoning from AG1 to a CUP, we might want to look at a CUP moratorium for a little while till we get our hands around that whole process. Community facilities and services, page 21. Policies, and then under policy number 1 and the strategy, it says work with MGG committee to implement environmentally responsible policies and practices through Milton. Okay, so that statement was added, and I understand that's a great committee, and they have done wonderful things in our city, but it's not a citizen-appointed committee as you were. So I just want to draw your attention to that, because if we're doing policy and it's a volunteer committee, maybe you already discussed that. I just wanted to further, I want to make sure that that whole idea was vetted, and perhaps we need a few more words around the purpose of that strategy, if indeed y'all have already discussed it. I want to make sure. I must have missed that meeting. Under natural and cultural resources, page 26, opportunities. This one says, revise the city's tree preservation ordinance. Thank you very much. Please keep that in there. It needs to be done. We can do so much better than what we're doing. And I think that I would like to see something in there about imposing even more penalizing fines. I mean, they just don't take us seriously. Page 27, policy 5. Promote the protection and maintenance of trees and contiguous green space in new developments. Okay, so this is what we're working on now, but it's very important that, again, we enforce our ordinances and we penalize, because it's a little bit like the Wild West out there. We've been converged upon with development, and we really need to get after it, and we can do it. We just have to enforce and penalize probably like we never have before, and that includes the view shed. We got to make sure that the language is is absolutely agreed upon between staff, council, the citizens. Maybe it's a picture of what it is, but it's worth deferring so that we get it right. And I think it's important that that language is also in our comp plan. On a final note, and I don't think I'm off topic, certain members in this room worked hard to put a press release out about the fireworks, and that was very much appreciated by the equestrian community. Education goes a long way to keeping farms here and for people to not want to leave and move away, and I appreciate that press release, and it did help. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Sue, do we have any more public comment?
That's all, sir.
Okay, if you please call the first item.
Our first item is discussion of City of Milton 2035 comprehensive draft. Ms. Michelle McIntosh Ross.
Yes, thank you. We're here with the City Council as well as the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee, the CPAC, to discuss the draft 2035 Comprehensive Plan. This is an update, a 5-year update from the original plan that we had done and adopted in 2011. So this is not a full update. This is just a partial update for a 5-year update. Okay, yes. Thank you. Keep in mind, this is the draft, and we have 3 months from now until we actually bring this plan forward for adoption at the October 17th meeting. On a month from now, August 15th, we'll have a public hearing and the transmittal of this draft plan to the Atlanta Regional Commission and DCA for their review. In order to do this update, we retained the Atlanta Regional Commission to help us with that. Coincidentally and fortunately, we have Allison Duncan, who worked on our original plan back in 2011, and so she is with ARC now, and she was assigned to work on our plan, so we are very fortunate to have her, and she will go through the PowerPoint. If anybody has any comments, I have cards with me. I'll put it over here so that folks can contact me later on. Again, keep in mind, this is a draft. We have plenty of time to get this right before we actually adopt. So I'll stop talking. I'll turn this over to Allison Duncan, and then we can get to it.
Great. And this is all clear. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Do we need to turn the lights off? It's kind of a dark slide. I don't know if the other ones are going to be that dark, but can y'all see, or do we need to? Is that better? That's better. Is that better? Okay, great. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to the council and to the CPAC for the privilege of being here this evening. I just want to underscore one thing that Michelle had mentioned, which is this is an update. Okay, so many of you may remember when we did the original plan years ago, and we had, I think, literally years of meetings, right? Meetings after meetings after meetings. But the good thing about that is that it gave you a very good comprehensive plan. So when it came time to update the plan, we realized that most of your existing language was very good. Okay, some communities are going to go out and they're going to spend a lot of money hiring consultants and bringing them in to rewrite their entire plan from scratch. That was not this process. Okay, ARC, as you are aware, will come into a community, and for no additional charge above and beyond what you already pay in your local dues, we will provide comprehensive planning services to your community. So that was the process that we have been undertaking for the last few months. And it's a privilege to be able to be back in the community and working with you on this process. But again, please do keep that in mind, that we didn't start from scratch. We actually reused most of what you already have. So what I'm going to do this evening is walk you through kind of the structure of the document, kind of underscore what's changed and what stayed the same. Most of it has stayed the same. If you have any questions as I'm going through this, please don't hesitate to jump in. Let me know what's on your mind. Also, if there's something that you specifically want to know if it changed or specifically think that we should change, this is the opportunity to do that. That's why we brought these groups together, to make sure that, as Michelle said, we're getting this right before we come back to you in a couple of months and ask to transmit this up to the Department of Community Affairs for review. So with that being said, let's walk through just a couple of demographic slides. Right, we're going to go way back to the beginning of the process to kind of remind you who we're talking about. Okay, we're talking about your community. So your population is projected to grow to right under 40,000 people around the year 2020. So Milton has seen pretty significant population growth since 2010, and where we see that you're projected to grow in the future. Along those same lines, when we talk about your age distribution, young and middle-aged adults pretty much are your largest demographic. You have a lot of children, residents under the age of 14. But basically, Milton is a community of families. Okay, is that a surprise? I'm telling you something that is news. Not really sure that I am. So again, when we look at the age distribution projections, like many metro communities, we're seeing kind of that trend of younger folks and older folks. So the two opposite ends of the spectrum here. I think that that's relevant as we talk about housing, and your housing needs going forward. But generally speaking, moving forward in the next 5-year period, we see that Milton is pretty much going to be a community of families. In terms of racial distribution, the majority of the community residents are white. Let's see, about 10% black residents and 10% of an Asian population. Comprises your racial distribution in 2010. Not projected to see a whole lot of change in that moving forward. If there's any demographic that we see growth, it's going to be in the Asian population up here in Milton, and that's fairly typical of what we see in a lot of our North Metro communities. Housing demand is still very high. If we kind of jump forward, when we start talking about average housing values, again, it's some of the highest housing values that we have in Metro Atlanta are here in Milton. So just a snapshot of your median rent and your selected monthly owner costs based on American Community Survey data. And area median income is also very high, right? So higher than most average household incomes that we have here in Metro Atlanta. And I'm walking you through that because that's basically the beginning part of your comprehensive plan document. That's the foundational layer that we start with any comprehensive plan, so we make sure we understand the community that we're planning for. This kind of sets the stage for where we go for the rest of the plan. More on income. And so when we got into your community vision, this community vision, starting around page 15, pretty much follows the community vision set out in your strategic plan. So for the most part, where possible, we want to make sure that all of your existing planning documents are reinforcing one another. So because Milton had just undertaken a fairly thorough strategic planning process, we just used the vision and the mission from the strategic plan, and we carried that forward into your comprehensive plan. Talking about the schedule, we want to make sure that we reflect to the community that there was opportunities for public engagement. So this is generally the schedule where we got started back in November of 2015 with our kickoff and had a series of public meetings as well as got advisory input from our Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee. As Michelle had mentioned, August 15th is the date that we're going to look for that public hearing to send this document up to the Department of Community Affairs. It'll take about 30 or 40 days to review it to make sure that we have all of the required plan components. And then we're going to be coming back to you in mid-October and ask for you to actually formally adopt this plan update. So that's a lot of nuts and bolts part of your plan. Now we're going to kind of get into sort of the meat of the document, your issues, opportunities, and policies. This starts around page 16. And we basically kept the same categories that you had for your existing plan document previously. I do want to hit on a couple of things, asking about kind of what has changed and what has stayed the same. Most of the language in your issues and opportunities and policies is the exact same language that you'll see in your existing comprehensive plan. There was so much thought and effort put into it 5 years ago that we found that most of that language was very relevant today going forward. I'm going to highlight a few changes. Generally speaking, we changed any of the text that needed to be updated to reflect activities that had been accomplished. So anything having to do with something like adopting the Transfer of Development Rights program, we made sure that that was very current and relevant. there were a number of references to exploring additional conservation planning tools. We made all of that language more general. Okay, so there was a lot of such as language, and we kind of took that and we said we took out a lot of the such as's, right? And so there's nothing that is going to say you need to explore one specific tool over another. All of that is still very neutral and still very general. The City of Milton can continue to explore the conservation planning tools that suit the community the best. So we made those updates. So there was a rather lengthy section detailing the location for a new city hall. Y'all have accomplished that. So that was basically the biggest section of text we removed from this area of your plan. And we added a policy that supported the green space bond. This was under the community facilities section. It was policy number 5 around page 22. We also added some language around the green space bond under the financing section on page 30. But other than that, every other change to the language in this section was really kind of a very minor text fix that reflected maybe something that 5 years ago the committee thought you should have done, and maybe you've accomplished it, or maybe you needed to bring it up and make it more relevant. Questions or comments about any of that? I don't know what the appropriate time is for questions or comments. But stop me if you have any thoughts on any of that. There's one thing that I will bring up about your transportation and mobility section. As you know, right now you're concurrently working on your comprehensive transportation plan update. Right now we've included some language in your comprehensive plan update that references that plan. So a transportation element is a required plan component under the Department of Community Affairs Planning rules. We don't want to create a process that is duplicative or redundant. We don't want to create any recommendations that might be in conflict with the outcomes of your CTP. So you can kind of see in the box to the right, I've inserted some placeholder language. I've actually asked the department for clarification about whether they'll accept this. And at such a time as we actually see a draft comprehensive transportation plan, we can maybe insert some of that language, or we can just continue to incorporate that by reference. But I did want to put that on your radar as maybe one potential kind of larger change that is still out there. Not sure if the department will accept that or not. But again, we don't want to create anything that may be in conflict with your existing comprehensive transportation plan. Any discussion or questions, or I'll just keep moving through? The other thing that we reference is other plans and programs that you have in place. So following up on that same idea about the comprehensive transportation plan, the City of Milton does a lot of work through either individual standalone plans like the Crabapple or the Deerfield codes. You have your strategic plan that we've already talked about, your conservation plan, your parks and recreation plan. So we make sure that all of those documents are also included in your comprehensive plan as a way to guide future growth and development because y'all put a lot of time, effort, and resources into developing these plans. So all of those are included in this plan by reference as well. So here we get into kind of another change that's probably worth spending some time on. This is what we've started to call your future community map. I think previously been a future development map, and decided that we needed something that more accurately reflected the direction the community was going in. So in terms of changes on this map, there's 4 additional rural view sheds that were added. That was Doris Road, Bethany Way, Batesville Road, and Taylor Road, in addition to the rural view sheds that were already there. We made some changes to the language around some of the boundaries. Let's see if I can get this laser pointer. So previously, some of these boundaries around like Crabapple, Deerfield, Birmingham, they had been sort of general circle, blob kind of areas. We made those more defined areas, and we called those master planned areas. Okay, so these are all areas that are defined by a master plan. I think they previously had been master planning areas or something that said, in the future, y'all need to sit down and master plan these areas. You've done that. So what we've done is taken the specific boundary of those, and we have put that on the map. There is one area that still needs to be done, so that is your future master planning area. My understanding is there is some language that's already been developed around this but is yet to be adopted. So we still have that as a to be done in the future. But those are some changes to this map. We added the trail plan to the map. And so if you kind of see one of the big changes, there's all these sort of light green swiggly lines, some darker green on top of some lighter green. That's your trail plan. So it was specifically requested that we put the trail plan on top of this future community map. So we've added that as well. Now all of the colors, sort of the base of the map, those are your character areas. Your character areas make up the majority of this section. We've made very few changes to your character areas. Your land use codes, your uses, your description, all of that is generally the same, again, with the exception of making updates where appropriate to reflect what you've accomplished. So, for example, in Crabapple and Deerfield, you see that we've changed some of that land use language to reflect the fact that you now have form-based codes, right, that govern those areas. But for the most part, as you go through that section, which starts around page 31, you're going to see that most of that is the same as what you already have.
I think in a work session, can the public ask questions, Kim?
Typically more relaxed protocols in a work session, but ultimately it said with the council that there's certainly nothing procedurally
I'm
improper.
fine with it. Council's okay. Is the council?
Yep. That's right.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted, since we have this upcoming Downhill Road issue, is that area of the map being changed as far as the recommendation goes? Is that staying the same from the 2010?
I don't.
Like, I don't have a copy, so I just update it. Oh, so, okay, I thought this was part of what she's talking about. Yeah, this is the community document. Yeah, we don't have to do the land use map. Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
okay.
I have a question for that on your behalf on page 60, which it's referenced, so I got you.
Let me advise everybody, one of the reasons that you struggle with questions from the gallery is because this is all being recorded, and so there'll be just a big blank space right then during that conversation.
Okay, other questions? Thoughts? At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to cover this section on the future land use map.
Hey, before we go there, can I ask some questions regarding the sections you just went through? And unfortunately, I don't want to refer us back to the short-term work program, but
Okay.
If I go back to page 16,
Okay.
and we talk about issues and opportunities, there's 4 distinct references to parks and recreation, whether they're active or passive.
Okay.
Community residents articulate a desire for more public green space, active or passive. The city lacks both indoor and outdoor community gathering spaces, et cetera, et cetera. But then when I fast forward and look into page 17, I don't see specific opportunities referenced about addressing that issue.
About the active and passive?
Yeah, and I think I heard you mention the green space bond, but that's
Okay.
not necessarily specific to these 4 issues that were outlined here, to addressing that.
Okay.
And I guess my next point is, I recall we discussed in an earlier work session for there to be a specific work program, short-term work program in 2017 to revisit Parks and Recreation Master Plan.
Correct.
And I guess what concerned me is when I fast forwarded to page 62, it's noted that the Parks and Recreation 15-year comprehensive plan is a completed item. And I thought we specifically identified as an advisory committee that was going to be a short-term work program item, that I'm not seeing it referenced that way.
Okay, so 62, I think, is the report of accomplishments. And I do have a slide on the report of accomplishments in the short-term work program. So I don't know if we want to talk about some of that
I guess what I'm most concerned with is making sure that we don't have an omission
right.
with the direction that the advisory committee gave regarding a Parks and Recreation plan.
Right. Let me double check.
Not entangle that with the green space bond, because they're
sure.
different.
No, you're absolutely right. We did have that. I feel like it's in here, and I'm going to have to find the exact line that it is in. So if it's okay, I can let Michelle talk about the land use map, and then unless there's other specific questions, I will go through, because I do have slides on the report of accomplishments in the short-term work program, and I will find the language, if it's in here, which it should be.
That's fine.
On that. But is there other...
That was my
No, I'm glad that you called us on that, because there is, in regard to the green space bond, which I hear you, right, because we had that long conversation about active versus passive, and, does the language reflect it? And so I want y'all to call me on these things if this isn't what you had in mind. But policy 5 on page 22, is the language that we developed around the green space bond and the financing for that. So do take a look at that and see if that reflects that conversation. And I will double check and make sure about the language around active parks, because we did talk about that, and I do feel like we put it in the work program. But but let me double check on that.
Yep.
And any other questions or anything before I sit down and turn it over to Michelle to talk about land use?
Okay, thank you. So I'll just go over some of the edits that we made from the previous land use map that we did in 2011 and this one. These areas that are now the form-based code areas, we went ahead and put their corresponding form-based codes on there. And the thought behind that is, as you know, a form-based code is form-based, and the code describes the types of uses that could go in the form-based, and it looks and pays a lot of attention to the architectural form of the buildings. So land use is almost not necessary, because the code describes what needs to go there. So we went ahead and added the form-based code areas to the land use map.
Michelle, before
Yes.
It says page 53 up there. Page 53 is not the future land use map in our thing. Do you know what page?
It's
I think that's
page 60.
60, okay. Sorry, thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, that's right. 60, okay, cool. That's good. I almost made it there.
Yeah. So the map is on which page? You said?
60.
Oh, okay. Okay, so page 60. Okay. We also added the TDR, the transfer of development right parcels, just for information, and expanded the Bell Memorial Park. Also, the categories, which there's a handout that went out that shows the categories. And David, maybe we can put it up, the Word document. Do I need to show you? Okay, so page 54 in the document, I made some edits just for clarification. In the previous comprehensive plan document, we had one low-density residential, one medium-density residential, and one high-density residential. And through the comprehensive plan process, we heard that maybe those were too broad for Milton, and that we needed to add some categories to the medium density, and just do different categories throughout. So this is my stab at it. The low density residential, that would be our 1 acre subdivisions, minimum lot size 1 acre. And for the medium density residential, I have up to 1.5 units, which will give you a minimum lot size of 0.75. The medium density number 2, which is up to 2 units per acre, will give you a minimum lot size of 0.5. And the medium density residential 3, up to 3 units per acre with a minimum lot size of 0.33, just doing the math. And then as far as the high density, I broke that down into 2. So we have the up to 5 units per acre, and then we have the more than 5 units per acre. And because the more than 5 units per acre captures what used to be the multifamily residential in the old plan, I figured we could go ahead and take it out. You tell me. You could go ahead and take it out, and then take out the references to those multifamily residential. Now, in areas that we have multifamily residential, that is in areas of the form-based code anyway, so that's captured in the form-based code, and so I felt like it would be redundant to have this in here, but you tell me. So these are the categories. The agriculture, equestrian, and estate residential stays the same, and any comments?
We'll
Later? Oh, okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything. Let's go back to the map, David. I'm sorry. Okay. So as far as an update with the low-density residential and the AEE, as we call it, the agricultural question estate residential, if you did a comparison of the map, you'll see some additional yellow because some of the land that was in agricultural question has become subdivisions, and so they've now turned to the low-density residential. So if you were to do a comparison, you would see some new subdivisions on there. So I think those are all of the edits. And okay, go ahead.
I have a question. Is from Pat brought it up as well as another citizen. It's regarding, and they referenced MDR, which suggests someone's been doing their homework because that was a change that we discussed. So thank you for addressing that. On page 60. There was, it's so small, I just got glasses. I thought they were good, but not that good. There was specific reference to Brookshade and whether or not this future land use represents the current use. As you just described, there's some, formerly agriculture that's now LDR. Did we make the appropriate change to Brookshade in particular regarding its current land use?
Yes, so we had our GIS look at this to see what their densities were, and so this reflects the densities.
So what is it labeled as? I can't tell the shades of orange.
Oh, the shades of orange, yeah. I did do my cheat sheet on that one. And we're going to look at the colors to see if we can't make them look better in print, because actually on the computer, the GIS manager sees it different and it looks different. Okay, so...
Looks like it's MDR1. That's what
this one, right here?
No, it's right here.
Yes. It's just above it.
Yeah, right there. It's above
that one is MDR3.
No.
Okay, and I think that is that Vickery Crest?
So the one in between Vickery and Brookshade.
Okay, this one, just on the corner right here, that is HDR1, and all of this is MDR2.
So Brookshade is currently or proposed to be labeled as MDR2?
Yeah, if this is Brookshade, yes.
Which is
half-acre lots.
Half-acre lots? What's the average lot size?
Minimum lot size.
But that's not the average.
Average is 9/10 of the average lot size.
Yeah.
It's almost 1 acre.
Okay.
Hang on. We debated this quite a bit, so I just want to make sure this is clear.
Yeah, so what we did was, if you look at our sheet with the calculations for the land use, we do have a minimum lot size in there. So the MDR 2 is a minimum lot size of 0.5 acre, and MDR 1 minimum lot size of 0.75 acre.
So I'm not sure if we want to base it strictly on a data point like that, or as you were hearing, the average for the neighborhood. And there's a lot of homes in that neighborhood, bringing it up closer to 0.9, which would make it an MDR1.
Yeah, I did look at what is done throughout as far as land use. Other cities, and we did prior, was minimum lot size. We did start and we drew a line at whatever the minimum lot size.
Versus an average. And the reason, Council, that this is important is that, as you heard, the upcoming rezoning, and we just want to make sure that we get this right. Basically, how is it, actually in existence? And these MDR categories are new categories. So
That makes sense.
But shouldn't Brookshade be MDR1 based upon
You
what
mean,
it
so
is now?
So if you have, if it's 100 acre, if it's 100 lots, and 2 are 0.5, and the rest are 0.9, see, I think that's
Well-
a loophole.
But I think that's your
Yeah.
point. You're saying that's a minimum, but it's not necessarily the average or
Right.
what the majority of the lots are.
Exactly.
Then why can't you split the subdivision up? If there's a certain part of the subdivision that is smaller lot size, show it the way it is. But if the rest of the subdivision is all typically You know, 3/4 acre or larger lots show it what it is.
Well, just looking at the list of lot sizes in there, you know, you could have like a map that looks dotted, and this is a land use exercise. We don't want to confuse land use with zoning.
Right, yeah, I think what you're hearing from feedback is average may be more appropriate representation.
Okay, so take every subdivision and figure an average.
Well, I'd defer to council because you guys deal with a lot of rezonings, and is that going to get us in more hot water? I don't know.
I can't say right now.
No, I
you
did.
don't want one lot that happens to be a half acre to throw it into a whole different category, any more so than you do want one lot that happens to be 3 acres to totally change the category if you just did it based on averages. So I don't know how the best way to do it is. It really reflects what the subdivision looks like.
And I just want to add, as a citizen, that if you're going to make it a minimum, when everything is an acre, that's really not basing decisions off accurate data points. If you're going to make your big decisions on this entire community off what a minimum was before it even got built, and then it got built, and this is what the people bought into, and then you're going to make decisions off of what the minimums were before anything was ever done, that makes no sense at all. You should be using actual data to base your decisions on future development. I don't know why you...
And just
Well,
a
the problem
comment,
is-
this subdivision was medium density in the old plan as well.
Ken,
Right,
Ken,
if
Ken,
this-
let Joe go ahead, and then I'm going to ask Ken to see if he's got any input on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for subdivisions or for land that's already developed and it's in use, this is almost academic. For land that is not developed, for land that still has some kind of development potential, then this is important because it sets the ground rules for what a potential, discussion may have in terms of what discussion we may have in terms of its development, its rezoning, all those types of things. But in terms of why use an average, why use a minimum, why use a median, why use any particular statistic, I think it gets back to a discussion. We don't want to be out of sync somehow with what reality is. An average sometimes doesn't represent any one particular property because we've got things that are on this side of the spectrum, things that are over here. The average is in the middle, and it doesn't show any reality. So, but neither does choosing one side or the other. So we just need to think about this. I would just ask that we be real clear on things that are not developed and have potential to be developed versus those things that are already developed.
Now, what you said too, I think since we're talking future land use, and I think you got to be careful with averages because, the future development could be averages. Well, they could have some larger lots and smaller. So, that's why I think the minimum is more important as far as what I think the citizens' concerns are.
Can I make a point to Karen Mervin's comment? And that at Brookshade, the vast majority of the lots are closer to 9/10 of an acre, with a couple outliers being a couple 6/10 of an acre and a couple 2-acre lots. So the average really is reflective of the look of the subdivision. So it really is much closer to 1 acre. Vast majority of the lots are right at 9/10. And those are the outliers average themselves out between 0.6 and 2, which is.
Can I make one quick point? Also, Big Crest was up there. I believe you said MDR3, but our issue with that is the north side of Big Crest, the borders potential development, they're all an acre or more on Central. So when you lump that whole neighborhood into an MDR3, you're bordering a potential development area with 1 acre plus. It doesn't seem to be cohesive either. So that's
I think the answer is more of, if we wanted to change the minimum sizes and the classification versus trying to average of what something is, what's around it. So, to some of the discussion, the point, we just need to probably change the classification if that was the will.
Okay. Now, I would caution if we just did an average, then you can have any lot size you want then.
That was
And you can
my
have
concern a minute ago.
really, really small lots. And so our categories between the
More
high
of it needs to
density
be a
resident, you can
minimum,
have lots
and
as
maybe
small
that minimum
as.
needs to change.
Right, but.
That was my point.
Or you could do it such that it's an average, it's a minimum with no more than a certain number of lots being less than that minimum. So if you said it was if you got, your average is 9/10 of an acre, even though it would fall under the category of what, 3/4 of an acre, even though there are 1 or 2 lots maybe less than that. So, I would say, you basically get rid of the bottom and top 10%, and then what is the look of the subdivision is what you really wanted to know.
When I was, in fact, maybe this is for continued discussion later too, though. We get some feedback, professional from, on the legal and also staff on how to handle this, because I think everybody here kind of knows the situation and what the concern is.
And one suggestion I think is combination of both might work as well, where if you have the average but with no subdivision less than a certain acreage itself, so, or no lot less than a certain acreage. So, for example, you can have 1.15 average with a 0.09 or 0.9 lot size minimum. And that's a great way to look at that also. So just that way, at least the key is knowing there's got to be an expectation among our residents to know what can be there. And I think that if they know what the minimum is, as well as what an average ought to be, that would at least help with an expectation. If we leave it vague, there will be those discrepancies that can just cause consternation that may be unnecessary.
Great discussion. I'm wondering how many other situations like this there are in the city that could possibly come up. But I think this discussion is directed specifically to a rezoning issue that's coming up here shortly. And I'm wondering if we are, in fact, discussing that rezoning issue before it's even advertised.
Wasn't aware of that, Councilman Lusk. I mean, I didn't sense that, but again, I'm not as tuned into perhaps the zoning issues that's coming up. Obviously, we should drift away from that if we need to. I mean, that we're not supposed to discuss those before they actually come to the council. I would also say, in response to the mayor's comments, first of all, this is comprehensive planning. It's a little different than drafting the zoning code, but I will say this with respect to your comment and Councilmember Thurman's comment and Councilmember Kuntz's comment, because we had this discussion with some other staff today, probably given how precise that Milton particularly likes to see its vision, that if you're going to make an error, if you're going to make any sort of an err on the side of more precision than less, because as you know, zoning codes particularly, and of course this may manifest itself into modifications of the zoning code, which is why it does matter. But zoning codes in Georgia are interpreted, if there is any ambiguity or wiggle room, it is interpreted as a matter of law to benefit the property owner and the free development and building of property. So if in fact we build in ambiguity or flex, just be mindful that we've built in ambiguity or flex. And that will in fact be exploited. And I don't mean that in a bad way or a pejorative way, but I'm just saying it will be exploited by those who want to build out their property.
I would word that another way, Ken.
Okay.
I would say that
of course you
should our interpretation of our laws favor the landowner as opposed to the city? Because I would get in a great debate with you that we should be giving the landowner as much flexibility as we should, as opposed to the city.
And Councilman Longoria, I would not touch that policy issue with the 10-foot pole with you, because no one elected me to do anything.
Right.
But I'm just trying to tell you the legal lay of the land. The legal lay of the land is that the law in Georgia favors property owners as well. Right. Because it says if you develop a set of regulations that affect what I can do on my private property that I pay taxes on, then we are going to narrowly construe that code against you. And if there's ever any wiggle room, it's going to go to the benefit of the property owner.
And I'd like to address Councilman Lusk's concern about discussing a future issue. And I want
Okay, all right.
Well, I'd
Point taken, Bill, if you want.
I'd respond to that, and I understand what you're getting at. But from a legal standpoint, and I defer to the city attorney, this specific issue is coming up in a rezoning session. So I would defer to him concerning the public zoning law as regards that. And that's why I asked if there were any other similar situations in the city like this, to where we could really address all of them. We know this one is coming up for sure, for rezoning, and I respect that. But, I just didn't want us to step over the line legally to get into that situation.
This is currently in progress, that's why.
That's right, I'm glad it was brought up. I mean, Councilmember Lutz's point is valid.
Can I add something to that? I feel that we should not be refraining from speaking about the issue at hand, which is this, because it may play a part in a future zoning session, right? We're speaking about this today, right now, because it affects us. The fact that it may overlap with the future zoning session or discussion points or decision, we should not be held back from discussing this because of a legal issue. Because today this is what we're discussing.
I believe, Ken,
And I understand your
and confirm, we need to be discussing this as a whole in a general area, not specific area.
If you were to ask me, where is the line? I mean, we'll just have to monitor it. So right now, I'm not hearing anything that concerns me too much, but I think Councilman Rulus was simply trying to raise the issue, but nothing's concerning me right now.
And Ken, what is our risk? And obviously, if the reason why we wanted to not make it specific is because when you have a public hearing, you want all parties associated for that public hearing and the developer self.
Because this wasn't advertised for a public hearing involved in an upcoming
so,
zoning.
and our risk in that situation where if we do step over that line, explain that exactly as what.
Well, right. I mean, it kind of goes back to the discussion I just had with Councilmember Longoria. I mean, the processes that govern our ability to affect land use also implicate procedural protections and due process. And so we have to be not only careful with respect to how we draft our codes, but also then how we engage in the process of modifying our codes by the way of rezoning property. So again, please don't let us hamstring the ability to have a free and engaging discussion tonight. Just be mindful that if we drift too far into discussing the particulars of an application that's in process, particularly when we did not advertise this evening for a public hearing on that, we could have some trouble procedurally. I'm not hearing that right now, though.
I think Councilman Longoria is right. What's existing is academic. It's irrelevant whether it's a median average. It's there. You're not going to change that. This is the future. And I think we all know that there's a part of our city that's not here that we all want low to the, I guess you called it, first degree medium density, 1 acre or more. Why don't we just write into our code, Planning Commission, think about this, everything west of a certain parallel on here, we're going to have low to medium density, bottom line done. Nobody wants multifamily housing. The Albatross that I drove by on the way in from Cambridge High School, I mean, that was an end run around what we all want. We all know where it is. It's not this area. It's the inner parts of our city where the farms are. Let's just be done with it. We're talking about the future. You're right. What's done is done. Whether we categorize some of these things as medium 2, medium 3 is irrelevant. We're not putting any more homes on there. They are there. It's not going to change. I don't know why this is so daggone complicated. Everybody that shows up here every week says the same dang thing. Quit putting more homes than 1 on an acre. Period. End. Get it done.
All right, and let's try to wrap this up so it's not just an open discussion. So, one more, sir.
Just one thing that may be worthwhile, right? So, given that, would it make sense just in the areas that are changing, undeveloped areas, just to reference what the current zoning is? So, if you're labeling something that's zoned for, say, AG1, for instance, that currently is zoned for 1 acre, and all of a sudden gets labeled in a classification that's below 1 acre, shouldn't we just look at those things? That, I would think, would create a conflict.
We don't have any of those.
Yeah, Michelle, we're not changing anything.
Yeah.
Right? No parcels have been changed.
In fact,
I'm sorry, the one that we picked up.
But I don't think they're changing it.
Was moved from
Brookside.
AG1, but was classified originally to medium density. So,
well, it was at a meeting for discussion.
I guess what are we advising
Yeah,
staff
that's.
to do? This came up in, I believe, in our March meeting. I don't know when any of this rezoning stuff, I'm not familiar with that. But this came up in our March meeting as an agenda item, which was to look at our future map and make sure that it was consistent with how we're actually using it. That was the impetus of all this.
And then we also discussed whether or not the comprehensive, the future land use map really should be what we want the future land use to be, or if it's just a historical document showing how things are currently zoned. And based on our city attorney's training, I said, you know, if you're going to use it as a something to support a zoning decision that you make, then you need to make sure that you always uphold the comprehensive land use plan and that it is not just a historical document. In the past, you know, if we change the zoning, we change the land use map. And so the land use map it's not really a future land use map, it's really just a historical zoning map. And now we need to decide, do we want it to be a historical zoning map, or do we want it really to be a future land use map? And if it really is a future land use map, we need to look at some parcels and decide really what is the proper future land use for those parcels.
And it should be based on existing or...
It should be based on whatever we feel like is a proper future land use for those parcels.
I don't know, Ken, do you want to?
Well, I mean, Councilor Thurman, you're right. I mean, let's be mindful. Whenever we take action to rezone property, we are, as a matter of law, changing the zoning map of the city of Milton. I mean, think of it as a zoning as-built, right? That's what you're doing. I mean, you're changing the zoning. To me, that zoning as-built map versus a future land use map are two totally different things. The future land use map being the statement of policy by the council as to their vision for what future development will look like in the city versus the as-built, which is simply the product of what is.
But right now, they're really the same.
Factory should be the vision.
Shouldn't be.
Well, right now, they're really the same. And nothing gets changed on the future land use map until it is changed with zoning. So it really isn't a future land use map, it's a as-built, or as-zoned really more than as-built.
As-zoned, right, as-zoned.
And according to that, a lot of it's not even accurate. Right?
No, I think it's accurate. It's accurate. They
Should
went
be
back and checked
accurate.
every part of it.
But I thought you said medium housing 3 was part of worksheet.
Well, that's based on this medium house, the definition of medium 3, then,
I guess based on part of the definition.
no, she said
No,
Brookshade's
medium
medium
two.
density 2, which is 2 units
Based on
per
homes.
acre, 1/2 acre lot minimum.
Yeah.
Right, and that's
Two.
So are there any lots below a half?
So that is technically actually what is in Brookshade. It is 1/2 acre lot minimum.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is
Smallest
that
lot is 0.6.
It's not 2 acres per lot, so you've got ambiguous.
Well, you have up to.
right.
Is that's the actual zoning, but it's not actually what.
Well,
where
and
it's
Yes.
that's a great point, because that could almost beg 3 maps. You have the map of what it is zoned, right? But then you have truly the as-built, what is on the ground, because what is on the ground may be different than what the zoning categories allow for with respect to a per acre build-out. And then you have the future land use map, which is more in the context of the vision.
Well, the problem with some of the
But
subdivisions.
I'm not saying you have to do that, I'm just suggesting to you, because the very distinction you all just made is a valid distinction.
Some of the subdivisions have lots in them that may be 1/2 acre lots and 2 acre lots, all within the same subdivision. And when you go based on a minimum, then it throws it into a higher category. And that's why I was saying that maybe it ought to say, you know, 1/2 acre lot, or a minimum of 0.5 acres, or not more than 10% of the homes are less than the 0.5 acres. So that way it's, if you have one house in there out of 300 houses that happens to be on a smaller lot for some reason or another, it doesn't throw the whole subdivision into a different category.
That's fine as an as-built, but not for future land use.
No,
And
no.
I think the key, we're looking at future, the way, the vision and the way we want it
But
to develop.
But the future land use map also includes what has already been on the property, so yes, it's part of future land use, because it's.
I think, wouldn't it be more, we're looking at the future land use map, and then at some point that will be an as-built, then you'll go to the next future land use map.
But the
So-
problem is then on the as-built, it shows it being a higher density look than what it really is, and it's gonna lend you to automatically say, okay, it looks higher density, you know, it's gonna be harder to keep from zoning the property around it to that same thing, or to uphold it if it ever gets taken to court.
Steve, let me ask this, because I think it's pretty clear concerns of the citizens, and I feel pretty confident everybody up here. Could you direct staff, you know, moving forward to come back with some information to help us look at that? Does that make sense? You know, because the concern is the, you know, the higher density, or, you know, the smaller, making it look smaller, as you said, Karen, because of the way it was zoned versus what's actually there. But give us some professional direction on how we can address that.
Understood.
Councilman Dillon, are you suggesting that you create the future land use map as a binding template for future development? And if that's the case, I think that's where we need to head. But is that legal?
It's not a binding template, but it is a plan.
Why wouldn't it be a binding template?
You know what? Let's let our city attorney.
Yeah.
Right, so, well, because that's not the way land use works. That's a fair question. So why is the future land use map not a binding template? Because you don't have the right to give away your legislative discretion in the areas of land use by adopting a document that does not go through the zoning procedures law. The comprehensive plan is a planning tool. It is a planning tool. Now, how rigorously you adhere to it, I think I may have said this a couple of weeks ago, how rigorously you adhere to it and how you interpret it is up to the enlightened conscience of the individual 7 council members that are on the council, and the planning commission for that matter. From the standpoint of the legality of it, it is not required to follow the requirements of the zoning procedures law before you adopt it. If you were to ask me, well, then what's the utility of it? Well, obviously the utility of it is that it is supposed to be a policy document that shows how you want the city of Milton to look. And if you zone a piece of property consistent with your future land use map, consistent with the designations on the future land use map, it is, for instance, an absolute check against an allegation of spot zoning. In other words, if you zone a property to a commercial zoning category and it's in a commercial colored area on your future land use map, and someone wants to say you spot zoned it, they will lose because you zoned it consistent with the future land use map. But on the other hand, I wish I could tell you that it was absolutely binding and that there has never been a government in Georgia that has ever deviated from the comprehensive plan or the future land use map, but it would be lying to you. It'd be disingenuous. They do. And sometimes they do for great reasons, and sometimes they do for not so great reasons. And it just depends. It's one of those things, everybody wants their hands to be bound until they don't want them to be bound. And then they wish they had a little more discretion. And so, very fair question, reasonable question, but it simply doesn't. It simply doesn't bind you.
Okay.
Rock solid bind you. I've even had governments want to say that we want to impose a rule that would take a supermajority to overcome our future land use map. And you can't do that. Not without a change to your charter.
Okay. But again, like I say, I think we understand the concerns and
absolutely
the minimums versus the averages, and you know, most folks, you know, want the larger lots and less density. So maybe if staff can be looking at that, put this together and give us some information that we can base our decisions on.
I have a question as well. It's more in the northern end of the map there, Michelle, but and off this revised page 54 we have the land use designation between agricultural, equestrian, estate residential, and then low density residential. Did you say all the yellow markings there are considered low density residential?
Yes.
Just clarification for me. And so those are all R1, R2, R2A, right?
Yes.
Well, no, it could be AG1s.
And AG1s as well?
Mm-hmm.
So
most of them are AG1s.
Most of them are AG1s as well. So, and that's kind of the question of the discrepancy. I think we've got subdivisions that are already in place, and those are considered low density residential, and then you've got agricultural, equestrian, and estate residential as well. Those would be in the kind of the tan areas, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So my question is what distinguishes an R1, R2 in the agricultural, equestrian, estate, residential versus the R1, R2, and the low density?
Well, it doesn't.
Exactly. And I'm asking the question because I know the answer to that.
Oh, you do? Okay.
So how do you then, and this would be a directive for CPAC, we as a community, in trying to stay rural and equestrian, have ambiguity with regards to that very specific overlap. And we've got R1, R2 subdivisions that are not staying equestrian and agricultural. And I think that ambiguity is causing some of our challenges that we face, and I would love as a direction to give CPAC the opportunity to find avenues that can create that distinction. And if it's a subdivision of which we discussed that is created, or another zoning classification we can talk about later, that would be it. But I think that that ambiguity is causing a lot of divisiveness in a way, and I would love to see that R1, R2 pick one side or the other, if that makes sense. So just my thinking on that.
Okay, and just for clarification how this came about, the most of the subdivisions in here, which is the yellow, the highlighter yellow, are AG1 subdivisions. There are a few CUPs, 1 or 2 or 3 maybe, but most of them are AG1 subdivisions. And so when we did this back in 2011, we wanted to have some sort of distinction between the subdivisions, like the HOA subdivisions, swim tennis, etc., as opposed to the large lots or even their 1 acre lots of open road, which brought us to having a definition for open road. We had a big discussion. That's a Milton coined phrase, by the way. Open road neighborhoods, which are the homes along the streets. They're not in a subdivision. They're, open road.
Well, Michelle,
So,
and on that point, and that's another issue of ambiguity. So we have AG1 subdivisions you're talking about, and then we have AG1 large acre lots that are not subdivided. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's some questions on an expectation that our residents may have, again, on that, as far as what separates that distinction. We've got AG1 and then AG1, subdivision versus non-subdivision. And I think as CPAC goes through directives, we need to have that distinction, because if we're going to have something that's declared agricultural, we need to make sure that our residents can expect it to be agricultural according to a definition. And so, again, just directive as well that I'm sending out there on that.
What is it that's in the top left hand?
right, I wanted to get to that, because this right here
Yes.
is an error. That is yellow, low density residential.
Okay,
That's
good.
Blue Valley.
I'm thinking, how in the
So
world
I
can
have
that have
a corrected
be on
one,
sewer?
but it didn't make it to our slide, so I did want to point that out.
But it just shows you how important colors are on a
Yeah.
map, because we all look at the colors.
Yeah.
Councilman Coons, we actually discussed this point in the last meeting. And I think the commission or planning group put together a slide on page 57, which is interesting to reference. And I think addresses your exact guidance back to this committee. We actually are going to bring it to the council for direction tonight.
Okay.
What you can see is the agricultural equestrian, as you pointed out, is AG1, R1, and R2, sure, which clearly overlaps with low density residential as being R1, R2, medium density, high density, and multifamily.
Sure.
And I think we have the latitude in this working session to make some changes there to make it less ambiguous.
You're free to make all the
Well, I mean, I think that's part of the working session.
Yeah, we also have a meeting Thursday as well, too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But this really summarizes the the consternation that we had as a committee, and then I think what we've broadly discussed tonight is right here on page 57.
Cool.
Yeah.
I just want to reiterate that when staff is doing this, when we look at everything, that it's not, I don't think our concerns are limited to current zoning versus future zoning. I think it's also you need to take into account actual use of the land when you're doing. I know this work, maybe we need to come up, maybe we need to have budget money to address this issue and get someone to actually give us a real map of what we have to.
Yes, we are working on an existing land use map, which is different from a future land use map.
Hopefully.
Make sure that it's properly aligned.
Did you guys want to discuss this chart? You know,
I just have a,
some-
where have we zoned our AG1 to R2? Are there any, I mean, do we have any R2s?
I don't know
mean,
where we
ever-
have things on the zoning map.
Right.
Correspond on the land use map and the zoning. This, yes, we could revise this and make changes to what we want to be compatible, especially since we made those changes to the land use categories. We're going to need to add them to here and figure out what zoning you want to be compatible. So that'll be an exercise moving forward. The main thing between the AEE and the low-density residential is just the subdivisions. Subdivisions versus not, because we didn't want a map that made it out like all of Milton was agricultural and we had no subdivisions, because people thought that when we had that old Fulton County map, it looked like there was nothing here. And then when we did the study, we realized, oh, there's lots here. There's a lot of subdivisions. So we just gave it a different tone of yellow and made a distinction. But maybe we need a longer paragraph on it. I don't know.
So I'd like to make a point and then ask a question. The point is we actually identified short-term work programs to address AEE, Agriculture, Equestrian, and Estate. There's two work programs. One of them was around 5-acre minimum, and the other was incentives for larger estate lots as a short-term program to preserve the AEE distinction and not to confuse it with subdivisions as it is today. My question is it the pleasure of this committee and council to eliminate the R1 and R2 from AG1? And therefore,
From AEE, you mean?
For AEE, I'm sorry, from AEE. And therefore, anything that's a subdivision would, by definition, fall in LDR or something more granular. MDR, high density. That's a question. I mean,
Well, the only way to get R2 and AG1 is have sewer, correct?
Well, let's back up.
I'm just trying to.
The R's are zoning categories. Right now, you can
Right.
build your subdivision without coming for rezoning, so they're
Right.
going to be AG1 regardless. The zoning will stay regardless of if they have an AEE land use or LDR. So the compatibility charge is just if somebody came with a rezoning for R's and they were on an AEE, then it would be compatible or not based on whatever the chart is. But right now, the map could change without anything happening or anybody coming through here. If somebody goes out there and builds a subdivision, it's going to be AG1 out on AEE land or whatever, and we just do it, change it to LDR. It's the same minimum 1 acre size of the lot, so we just gave it a different color so it doesn't look like nothing is happening.
right.
Which it does have. So, thinking concept-wise and what's available, and I know what's before us and what we've been through has been highly controversial. But as it is, and Ms. Bentley, I know we've talked about a lot of different things, and I respect your opinions. She brought up the point that we said we want to be open to other land use ideas outside us that might be able to achieve our objectives. So in looking at subdivisions that have allowed for equestrian aspects to remain, or not, I'm okay with creating a classification or finding a zoning classification that allows for that to happen. But in order to do so, we have to be understanding of the economics that are creating the condition that we have today. So as we look at the objective that we have, which in everything in here, we agree that we want to remain rural, we want to remain density neutral, and per the definition of conservation subdivisions on page 108, that's exactly what it states. There's nothing different there. But I'd love to see us be open to those classifications that achieve the objectives, rather than that becoming a bright yellow map at some point in time.
So now you'd be open to having less than 1 acre minimums in here, is that correct?
I'm looking for the definition of a conservation subdivision per the definition of page 108, which the underlying zoning is AG1, that allows for flexibility of somehow to achieve the equestrian aspect, but placing the homes in such a way that allows for contiguous land to remain.
So my question is, we're the comprehensive plan advisory committee.
Right.
And we took out the CSO because y'all voted no. I mean, it's just like you voted no against anything. Why would we keep it in the land use plan?
Sure.
So you want us to put it back in there?
Well, we broadened it though. I mean, I think the earlier point, we eliminated the such ases.
Correct.
So we didn't eliminate the council's ability to pursue that, or staff for that matter to pursue.
Right, we
pursue
made
that
it to
concept.
where it wasn't like, you do this, this, and this.
Right, we
yeah.
didn't handcuff them, we didn't direct them.
So my point is, I don't care if it's a conservation subdivision or not.
It's something
Find a
different.
way to make a ceremony or something like that. And that's kind of is. You know, if you looked at CBS, that actually had a video of it just last weekend, I'm sitting there saying we want to be agricultural, and yet we have people that would love to do community gardens, and they can't because we have no community
We've
land.
done that for the last 2 years, Matt.
You've done, oh, okay. So I'm talking from an equestrian perspective. If we are going to do community land, then we need to be able to know what that is and provide an expectation to keep that, okay? I'm very well aware of what members of the community have said. I'm also well aware of the efforts that they've made to try to achieve an objective, and yet I'm still having loss of land due to AG1 on a regular basis, and that's happening nonstop. And I went through 5 subdivisions just last week and took videos of me showing exactly what's happening, and none of those are gonna give us a community garden. So my thing is, and I'll say this right here, my point is I want us to know that we can create an expectation that if we have a subdivision that's done, that is not gonna take away the equestrian aspect. And I want us in the CPAC committee to show us an expectation, if a subdivision is coming in, how is that going to maintain an equestrian or agrarian community and have that defined and pictured? Because right now we have subdivisions that are coming in that don't give us residents that expectation. And I'm okay with it. So my thought is that, you know, we've got great AG1 subdivisions. I have no problem with it. I live in one, except for the fact that our original landowner was able to stay there and keep a portion of that cow pastures and barns, et cetera. That's not happening anymore. And so there is an element of the community that wants to see flexibility and an expectation of keeping that, and how we go about finding that. If this is the answer, so be it. But I want to hear evidence that shows that this is going to be the answer.
Well, hold it back. We're not prescribing an answer here. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
There's 2 or 3 short-term work programs that we recommended, specific to what I think we all want to achieve. And they're on page 69 and 70. And I'll read one of them as an example. Establish incentive packages to encourage the retention of farms and equestrian facilities.
Right.
Explore the establishment of a city-sponsored TDR bank.
Right.
These are short-term programs. The other one is review, this is probably the most impactful, review the code of ordinances for desired enhancements that protect our rural character.
Right.
So this is an example where we through staffs and professional, counsel, we're asking for and allowing the latitude to define that. I don't think we can specify that as a committee today.
I'd like to make one addition to that. And I mentioned this last week. I'd love to see an equestrian council created that might help with initiatives for that part of a rural character. And that's just my suggestion as input. And
I think
there actually is another work program for that, which is to create a formal feedback loop with the equestrian community.
I saw that in there. I just want to make it.
So, I mean, we're very sensitive to that, but to, I think, Peyton's point, we left it a little more open-ended, but we defined it as a specific action item in a short-term program.
Okay, I'm gonna let Joe, Joe.
Yeah, the only point I wanted to make, and it goes back to something Michelle said at the very beginning, is we can't confuse zoning with land use. They have to be compatible, no doubt, but one fits in another. In other words, what we're trying to do from a zoning point of view has to be able to lay on top of what our land use concepts and plans are. Okay, so I understand what you're saying, Matt, but I don't think there's anything incompatible with what we're talking about here that would negate the ability to go in a particular direction for a particular piece of property. Okay,
And we're not talking about
so
specific
I want to make sure that we understand we're not, because that's way too granular. If we're trying to make decisions in a land use plan that look like that, we may as well stay here for the rest of the year because it's a lot of work, a lot more work than what we're thinking.
Sure, I
So-
respect that. It's just making sure that where we're ambiguous, where there is ambiguity, that we have some clarity that can be expected. For the same reason for Donegal Lane and what they're talking about too.
The only other thing, and that's another good point, and I want to mention this, is that a lot of people talked about removing ambiguity. The only way for us to remove ambiguity is to get much more detailed. Because, you know, as you stay high level, ambiguity is just there. It's not until you drill into the details that you start removing that. And I think you guys are doing an awesome amount of work already. Getting more granular, getting more detailed, I don't know that that's something that's possible. I think that the level that we're operating here, the level that we're planning, is the appropriate level. So thank you guys.
Okay, Karen.
While we're looking at colors on a map, we have several subdivisions that are equestrian type subdivisions that may have a minimum of 4 or 5 acre lots. I would love to see those subdivisions highlighted in their own color on the map, because I think that would bring attention to the fact that those are subdivision type concepts that will work within Milton.
I agree.
Because right now, all the white just looks like it's land that can be developed. And we have North Valley, Tullamore, I mean, we have a lot of subdivisions that are fully developed that the land is not going to change unless somebody, you know, came in and I guess bought out the whole subdivision. But they're concepts that have worked in the past in Milton, and I think maybe if we highlighted them with their own color, people would see that, hey, you know, this is something that will work in Milton.
That's a good point.
No, these would still all be in the areas that are 1 acre lots. But at the same time, if they're fully developed out and it's not land that's available really to be developed, then I think it ought to have, and they're developed as equestrian type subdivisions, they ought to be their own color on the map so that it doesn't look like it's just land that could be, somebody could come in and develop. I want to make sure that people understand that they can do something other than your standard 1 acre lot subdivision, and it worked in Milton. And the other subdivisions have worked.
Right. So Karen, there is a color on this map for that, AEE.
Yeah, but it's all the same color as
the
undeveloped stuff.
It's a light gray. It's the first one on the list. It doesn't stand out, and I don't think we have applied it anywhere. But if you look on the legend, the first one is AEE.
Yeah, but AEE is everything that really hasn't been developed too. I'm talking about stuff that has subdivisions that have actually been developed.
Totally agree. I don't think we've done either. I don't think we've applied the AEE, to your point. And I don't think it stands out as that color either. It says there's 12,000 acres of it.
No, but that's all just all the land that doesn't fit in anything else.
But then to your specific direction is, let's take the ones that are currently used that way and label them appropriately.
Let's make sure people know it works.
Maybe we need a.
Is that an existing land use map then? That's what I'm hearing. I don't know.
We need a bright color. We need to have that as an example, so maybe it'll catch somebody's attention as they're moving forward, that, hey, look at these.
Yeah.
North Valley is a great, fantastic example.
Yeah.
Well, so
Yeah.
Tullamore.
North Valley, Tullamore, we've got several examples of
Six Hills.
things that work.
There's River's Edge is coming in,
Right.
there's some things that.
And we need to highlight what works.
And that's why we need the council to help educate from a promotion perspective, everything else.
Like a transparency over the top of future. You really see what's there and what the future is and how those two come together.
But I think what I'm hearing that I think we can do a better job on is if we can identify the existing subdivisions that would be classified in those ways. And have have their own different color so it stands out, that might get some attention.
You guys
for
okay with
folks
that?
moving forward as they look at doing
Yeah.
something.
Yep.
Something that, make them a pretty color.
I'm bringing up something here to address Peyton's comment about conservation subdivisions being denied. Well, that's not totally true. Look at the December 7th, 2015 meeting, Pearl Harbor Day of 2015. The general consensus in that meeting, and it was all 7 of us, is we agreed that there were definite benefits of conservation subdivision. It was Councilmember Longoria who finally brought up the point and the motion to deny it, and the reason at that time was because of the language in that ordinance. It wasn't perfected, and discussion went on through that meeting that we needed to take another look at it, and Dr. Noel Carpenter brought it up during that meeting that we ought to form a separate committee of experts in the field, land planning, and the whole gamut to discuss that. And I suggested that we come up with a schedule and form that committee and come back to the city with further discussion on it. And wheels fell off of that one. It didn't come back. But since then, there's been several references to it in rezoning meetings here, that there are certain features of the conservation subdivision ordinance that ought to be incorporated in our documents and in other cases here. So what I'm getting at, I guess, is, and I notice that there's no reference at all in this document that I have here to conservation subdivisions. There was a lot of work put into that document or that ordinance. 2 or 3 years of meetings, community meetings, which were well attended, brought in different consultants, and there was a lot of acceptance for most part of that ordinance. So I'd like to see it take another swipe at that one, and if we can extract the better parts of that ordinance out and apply them to the AEE or the developments like River's Edge and Tullamore, or use those as examples. I think we have an opportunity there to preserve a lot of green space, a lot of natural features of what we have left up here that's undeveloped. I'd just like to see another shot at that.
I think one of the good things about this document is that it is so kind of high level and more of a guiding principle that, you're right, it doesn't address it, which is both a pro and a con depending on how you want to look at it, but nevertheless, it allows the city, staff, council the opportunity to, if they want to go back down that path, they certainly are welcome to do it. Nothing prescribes them, from not doing it or prohibits them, or requires them to do it. It gives them that option. I think that there has been a number of good components that are represented here, particularly in a lot of the work studies and the future opportunities to address it. So I think that you've got the way this is right now. It's certainly open to change. There's a lot of opportunities to engage in that. And quite frankly, that term conservation ordinance was simply just so divisive for this community. No matter where you went on it, one side or the other, it had a lot of connotations with it. To bring it into this document, which is going to be the guiding principles, whether they're concepts that were good or bad or indifferent, to use that terminology in here, arguably just from a communication or from an optics standpoint, may have presented some particular challenges in terms of selling this to the community.
Well, and I appreciate that, but maybe further to that discussion, And really, I appreciate all of the effort that you all have put into this. But to Ms. Bentley's comment early on, I wish we could have had a red line document here to go through in 74 pages in this one and 100 pages in the previous one and try to compare them. It's difficult to see the path or the trail that y'all have been down.
I couldn't agree more with you.
And it's, I understand the labor that you put into it, but it's a pretty laborious process for us to go through it, for us to sit here tonight and understand.
We're all in agreement with you.
Yeah.
So
That's not our. We're on the same page with that.
So hopefully we could.
I would point out just a couple of thoughts too. As divisive as the conservation subdivision ordinance proposal was for the city, we all would agree that it was great debate that went into that, and a lot of hard work and a lot of hours with all the appropriate documented experts on it, as well as the voice of the community. I promise you that as a sitting member on the original creation of this document, that all too often in the more recent years where the conservation subdivision ordinance was debated, and all too often hats were hung on the fact that the comprehensive land use plan referenced conservation subdivisions. That was a complete misnomer, because it was never contemplated in the creation of this document the first time around. Now, it referenced using conservation subdivision type principles, but it did not necessarily suggest that we should adopt a conservation subdivision ordinance. I think it was great that we debated it as a city and got us to the point where we are today, where we know what the community's, the greater percentage of the community feels about that. So I think, with great debate, as the part of the current comprehensive land use plan committee, we're in a good place without it specifically being in there.
One comment on that, because I think it might have been directed to me. Obviously,
No, there was no direction to anybody
well,
that.
it's very important for me on this end is.
I know you're taking it as a personal agenda item. There was nothing directed at you. I promise.
I understand. It was, and I appreciate that. You put a lot of work in everything, and I know we've been, on opposite ends of this. I appreciate that. I mean, I respect your position as it is. But I have done the work on the comprehensive plan, and it says specifically that the city should implement conservation subdivisions per the short-term work program, as well as an item LUDC 11.
Right, but that was not a part of when we wrote the first comprehensive land use plan.
In 2011, yeah, it was voted on June 6, 2011.
Yeah, I was part of that.
Well, and then maybe you look at it. I don't know. I read it. It's just in there. It's just, so my point is that we're looking at things right now that we want to implement. We have things back then that are outlined the same way that we want to implement in the same thing. And so the point is the very fact that we have these items listed in here are very important to the expectations of the community.
Absolutely.
That we do. I mean, the last one had them in there in the same format of what you're doing now. And so that's it. It's in there. And the question that was brought forth by the city attorney, and then Peyton, this is for you as well. Obviously, there's a question of interpretation of the comprehensive plan about whether we follow it or not, and what will it entail. And if we leave it ambiguous to the flexibility of what it is, as what Michelle was saying, which I can understand that argument, then there's that could be okay, is what I'm saying. My point is that though, so long as we understand that the intent of what we're trying to do is to be flexible in the solutions of what it is, even if that includes an item that may achieve our objective that could be divisive, such as the definition of conservation subdivisions on page 108, then I think it's still in the definitions of this today. So, yes, sure it is, page 72. So if that is an item that we should consider to achieve our objectives, then I think we need to be open to those, is all I'm saying.
Well, I will tell you that the committee was in 100% agreement that we did not want specific things like the comprehensive subdivision ordinance to be written in here, because that, if it's in there, then it says you have to do it. And we wanted to be able to have it much more broad so that we can continue to explore conservation options, but not a conservation subdivision ordinance as such.
Yes.
And so we were all, I think, 100% in agreement that that's, it missing from the current document was not accidental. It was very purposeful. And we had a lot of discussion on it That we felt like maybe there's some parts of the conservation subdivision that concepts that we eventually will have in Milton, but a conservation subdivision ordinance we did not want to have in the comprehensive plan.
And that's a respectful decision by a body. Okay, I can understand that. So my point is that per the very plan that we have, I take it very seriously to try to interpret it in such a way that we try to implement the things that are in there according to directives that we have. So much so that I was willing to fight for the very 2011 plan that we had that actually directed us to do it. And that was the issue that we had. And so this is a very important document. So whatever we do put in there that is specific needs to be understood. And if it is to be ambiguous for some of these items, maybe we should list it as such. But to the intent of finding a way to achieve the objective, in my mind, of the equestrian aspect of our community. And I'm okay with whatever we come up with to find out what that is. But I want to make sure that as a council and as a body and as a staff, we direct development back towards the very logo that we have up there behind me. And I think that needs to be done. And that's all I'm saying. But so.
And I just want to make a point to everybody's discussion, and Councilmember Loss brought it up first with the conservation subdivision ordinance. And some of us, actually, after all the hard work and information and whatnot, including myself, did not support one. Some council members wanted different information and tweaked, as you said, for Joe's motion. So just want to clarify that. So, in some ways, there's some of us that would not, appreciate the fact that it's not in there specifying a conservation subdivision ordinance. So,
I think we're far. Go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, Paul. Go ahead.
I think to everyone's point that we're trying to make, we are far better served without it being named specifically as that. And there are elements of a conservation subdivision ordinance that may have merit, but a conservation subdivision ordinance, as we have heard to date, we've all agreed has been decided was not written to serve the purposes of Milton. As such, though, the comprehensive land use plan, as contemplated by the CPAC, is going down exactly the path that we're talking about, which is exploring alternative methods to do that. Mm-hmm. There are some call to action plans that are on the other end of the spectrum, where we're looking for incentives to go to larger lot incentives that I think is really what the community's after, not necessarily smaller lot solutions with saved green space. Now, I do support saving a green space, but not with the use of smaller lots to do that. So without it being specifically in there, Matt, I think you were far better served.
The 2011 plan, the strategy actually said consider conservation subdivisions in rural and environmentally sensitive areas. In addition, consider a conservation subdivision classification that incorporates gravel roads. I believe we have, over the last 2 years, done a lot of considering.
I would agree with that. Yeah. So the advice I'd give you guys, we talked a little bit about red lines. A red line document for this would be very, very difficult because the documents are so big. So, what I would suggest is maybe we could come up with a differences between document that just points out the major differences that you guys have made between the previous version and this version. I would find that a little bit more helpful than sifting through a red line.
I agree. I think you'd see nothing but red lines if you tried to compare.
Yeah. It would be. It would
be a lot of red.
Well, and I'm not implying that that's the only way to do it. However it is, I think any type of document that points out the difference. And I'm not up to killing a bunch of trees and bringing a bunch more labor. I don't want to get fined in violation of the tree ordinance. Yeah. But there are ways to do it.
Right,
it's hard to digest all this.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
At least for me.
No, I wanted to let the guys know that
I'm tracking.
I'm with you guys, because the closer you get to a finished product, the less you want to look at the red line, and the more you want to just look at the document. So
I think going forward, we need to see the red line, because this is our first time seeing this product. And going forward, I assume we will have the red line version of whatever changes are made to this, so we don't have to discuss them all over again.
We only have one more. I think we only have one more meeting. That's Thursday, correct?
Well, yes, you have a meeting on Thursday, but keep in mind we have all the way till October. We could put some meetings in if you need.
Just what I needed. One more calendar meeting.
Shouldn't have said anything.
Yeah.
I'm good with the Thursday.
Yes.
I'm okay with it.
Or more.
Yeah.
Or 5 acre lots. Or,
It's all about economics at the end of the day.
okay.
All right, so we'll continue with the presentation. We have a couple
I thought we were done.
I actually basically think we're done, because we've covered a lot of, well, maybe, does that matter? It's not going forward. It doesn't, I actually don't need to go forward.
No, there it is.
Right, basically the last slide, and y'all have covered a lot of this, was to talk about this idea of a report of accomplishments in a work program, but I think you've hit on a lot of these items. I don't think I'm talking into the microphone. The report of accomplishments is simply, again, a required look back at what you said you were going to do and whether or not you actually accomplished it, and the city's accomplished a lot of it. There's some very specific language that we use. We say that something's either completed, underway, postponed, or canceled. If something's canceled, it doesn't mean that you decided not to do it or you changed your mind. It just might mean that the recommendation is no longer timely. Or in the case of Milton, there was several things that were put into the last work program that are things that you would do just because you're a government, right? We're kind of moving away from specifying things like, figure out where you're going to put a new fire station. We don't write those things in there anymore. That's what you do just because you're a government. So that's basically what that report of accomplishment section is. And then we talked about the items in the short-term work program. We did kind of elevate the language. We took it up to a higher level about the recreation program, and now I got my pages all out of order. But there was an item in there to address the question earlier, to reflect green space needs within the updated comprehensive plan in 2017. And part of the reason that was a little bit higher level is because there was already a work program item that was given to us from the strategic plan that talked about researching new program offerings, which might include activities not currently offered by Milton, and that's the responsibility of the Parks and Recreation Department. So that was already a current item that's being undertaken, I think, through the strategic plan document. So we kind of put those together. Sorry, page 68 is the research new program offerings.
That's programs, though. That's programming. That's not
right.
parks.
I hear you. And we combined that on page 70 with reflect green space needs within the updated comprehensive plan. So again, we kind of did keep things at that higher level.
Yeah, that's green space, though. That's what I said. We made, Karen, and help me out here. Didn't we make a specific recommendation?
Yeah, we
for
talked
parks?
about active parks.
Active parks.
Right.
So programming
So-
and green space isn't. I think it was a pleasure of our committee to make sure there was a specific work plan regarding active parks.
Okay.
What are we going to do with specifically? What are we going to do with Birmingham as an example?
Right. So what you're saying is that you don't like those two recommendations.
Well, no, those two are fine.
I know, but they don't get it
A
done.
specific one regarding a parks plan, as it was referenced. Birmingham, we don't need to say Birmingham, but
Just active
parks.
plan is.
Okay.
And
Okay.
is it just me or
No,
you're
that's
all
right.
No, that's right.
Right. No. I mean, that's, we'll put that in there specifically. Again, we'd already had a couple of other recommendations in there and in the existing strategic plan program that we thought covered it, but that's why we're here, is for you to tell me otherwise. So I got that. There was a number of notes that I made during the last discussion, about short-term work program items. Anything else top of mind that we want to make sure that we get in there? And if not, I can stop talking and we can conclude the meeting. So, yes, did you want to address that, Michelle? So I am done. Thank you.
All right. So CPAC has a meeting in the executive conference room down the hall on Thursday at 6:30 p.m. scheduled. So it's an open meeting. So just a reminder to go over all of this and get direction. And Peyton, if you want more meetings, we could schedule those at that time.
You know how I feel. But real quick, Michelle, on Joe and Bill and everyone's point, is there a way after our meeting on Thursday, since if that is our final meeting, for us to get a document that summarizes the changes from The original comp plan?
From the original?
Yeah, or from the last, yeah, from the original.
I actually have a red line document because I assumed somebody would ask for it.
How redlined is that? Is that pretty?
It's everything that we changed from
Well,
the
it's gonna be
original.
200 some pages. That's a good start. I mean,
So, yeah.
that's a start.
So again,
That's fine.
I've
Look
worked
at it
with Milton for a long
electronically.
time. I figured at some
Don't
point
kill
somebody
tree.
would ask for that.
All right.
So I
Okay,
again, it's-
so that one, and then I also heard a difference between document, you need that as well?
You can consider
Oh.
that the same thing.
An executive
So
summary?
whatever makes the most sense, whatever you guys
Yeah.
agree to, I'm cool with.
Okay. Okay, well, that is it for me, and Allison, and, on to the next item. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys, for
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for
Good.
everything. For your time, I appreciate it. Hey, City, you will call our next item.
These guys get to leave. 3-minute break while they leave. Regardless of whether people agree or disagree, I've never hesitated to say what I think, so.
Matt, just to be clear, that was not.
I was the one who put out the president PowerPoint, and what I saw was in there. I was the one that put out the PowerPoint, and what I saw was council meeting.
Right.
And it wasn't that you were doing
No, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, so the, my point
Turns
is
out we have
that
a few.
I take what's in here very seriously.
Yeah, no, you do.
And,
But that, just to be clear, that was a general comment. And nobody takes it in mind when I made that comment.
so we appreciate it. All right.
She's sitting down there.
Should we actually make tens of one of these when we're done? So, no, instead of, I know we're 10 years into them, we never had a real general one that we can have, because now it's going to go down to some values. Share with people.
Yeah. Do what now? Go ahead, Stacy.
I didn't hear you.
Water?
No,
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, please.
Sorry,
No,
I didn't
good.
put any
No,
commission
good.
water up there to the council would they get their own.
Talk to them, please. Yeah, you want, I don't mind going, let's go to that. Yeah, yeah. No, you gotta, yeah, it's not a problem. Stacy, we're gonna reverse here a little bit, so.
Oh, I see what's going on. I see what's going on.
City,
I did, I laid that card down, didn't I?
City, would you please call
But he's
the-
only doing it to save us
the
money,
last
because we
item.
won't be billing us for that
The
time.
Osilla card.
Right?
You used that one last time, you gotta make.
Hey, you wanna do this by teleconference? I mean, we could do that too.
Any other combination you need to make for you, Ken?
Okay, guys, we're gonna switch the order just because Ken's got it.
Our item number 4 is discussion on amendments to the Milton Ethics Code to authorize limited reimbursement of attorney's fees should a city official or employee accused of an ethics complaint, if the complaint against them is dismissed, and establishing ethics panel attorney's per diem rate. Mr. Ken Gerard, I do have one public comment. Do we want to hear that first?
Yeah.
Okay, that's Mr. Tim Becker.
Mr. Becker in here.
He's
Must have gone outside.
Would anybody wanna grab him?
There's a citizen meeting for public comment.
Trash can.
He didn't know the order was getting changed.
We changed the order because.
We just changed the order. If you have public comment.
So we're talking about the,
Ethics, the last, yes.
Okay, yeah, and my comments are short, so thanks for coming and getting me. Tim Becker, 15625 Canterbury Chase. First of all, I'm not sure why this topic is coming up, given all the important issues facing the city, much more important issues. So I'd like in this discussion for somebody to answer the why and who relative to this issue. The second thing is I wanted, in economics, there's a term called moral hazard. Moral hazard occurs when one person takes more risk because someone else bears the cost of those risks. A moral hazard may occur where the actions of one party may change to the detriment of another after a financial transaction has taken place. Now, this notion of moral hazard has been applied outside of economics. It's been applied to politics, and in particular, Thomas Sowell, in an article in 2010, wrote Moral Hazard in Politics. Very interesting article. I encourage everybody to read it. So the issue that I have here is that we should not be creating a safety net. The government should not be creating a safety net for itself. I don't think that we should be making it easier for city officials to be reckless with how they act and what they say. I've seen several examples of bad behavior on the part of people within the city government, and I'm just afraid that if we are now sort of subsidizing that behavior, providing a backstop, that we are creating a moral hazard. And so I would vote or urge you to vote against anything that would subsidize bad behavior within the city of Milton. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'll begin the discussion, if that's okay?
Sure.
Yeah. All right, so I'm not really at liberty to talk about the why, but I can tell you the state of Milton's ethics code right now. As you know, Milton went to a panel system some years ago. Milton used to do what many jurisdictions did, which had a board of ethics. A lot of jurisdictions have boards of ethics still, some don't. Other jurisdictions have transferred over to a panel system. I think since we've had in place the panel system, Sudie, you can check me on this, but I'm not sure that we've ever had an ethics complaint since we've had the panel system, right? So we've never even assembled the panel. However, I wanted to bring this to your attention based upon some feedback I've gotten, and that is this. So when a complaint comes in, right, government officials are typically, well, how you respond to an ethics complaint is, of course, up to you. You can choose to go it alone, if you will, or you could choose to lawyer up. I will go ahead and tell you, and I think you knew this, but if you didn't, I'll tell you now. If you are alleged to have committed a violation of the ethics code, I'm not going to be your lawyer. I don't do that in any of the jurisdictions I work in, and there's a reason for that, because my representation is to the collective. I represent the government. Once I begin biting off individuals amongst you to start representing, it changes the entire dynamic. Even if I got a conflict waiver from every one of you because I'm representing one individually and the rest of you collectively, you all would look at me differently. So I won't represent any of you. Therefore, you would be faced with this. You would either go it alone, pro se, as they say, or you would lawyer up. If you lose the ethics matter, in other words, if there is a finding by the ethics panel that you committed some sort of a violation of the City of Milton Ethics Code, obviously there would be whatever sanction that the panels would impose upon you, and those sanctions are set forth in the code. But what if you win? And I will tell you, and this is not a criticism of anything. It's not even really. It's just it's a statement from my perspective of sort of the way things are. Most ethics complaints in the jurisdictions I work in are unsuccessful. And what I mean by that is most of them do not result in a finding of unethical conduct, which means that those officials that are wrapped up in those ethics situations have now lawyered up. They have paid a fee for that attorney to represent them. They have made their arguments to the panel, whether it's at the investigatory stage or whether it's all the way to the hearing, and then they win. And so here's the way it works. Now, because of a complaint made in the course and scope of their official duties as an official, they have now spent $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to go through this process, and the allegations based upon the findings of the panel were unsuccessful. Should you be entitled to reimbursement for those expenses derived out of the course and scope of your duties as a public official? Now, it's not rhetorical. It's a policy question. I'm just asking you, If you do, I think there may be something we can do about that. The case is Gwinnett County versus Yates. When an official acting in his or her official capacity is required to hire outside counsel to assert a legal position that the local government attorney cannot, because of a conflict in representing the local government, or will not assert, and the official is successful in asserting his or her position, the local government must pay the official's attorney's fees.
So it's only if you're found, basically.
Only if it results in a dismissal of the allegations of unethical conduct against you. Now, I don't want to get ahead of you. You may not have even given this much thought. It's on an agenda. You wanted to hear a presentation from me. I'm reciting to you the Gwinnett County versus Yates case. Candidly, there's another statute in the Georgia Code that I wish addressed this issue spot on. Gwinnett County case addresses it from what I would call a common law perspective. In fact, Gwinnett even says this payment of fees, the government having to pay your fees, here's what it says, is not because of any bad faith or improper conduct on the part of the government. In other words, it's not a punitive finding against the government. It is rather, this is simply an instance of an expense of government operation. The note being is that if you had to go and lawyer up to defend yourself in your official capacity and I was not willing to represent you, which I'm not, then you shouldn't be straddled with that cost. That's it. Now, you don't see many instances of that case dealing with administrative hearings. Most of the time it's in courts of record, but the legal proposition is very broad. It says anytime you are asked or want to assert a legal position that I can't assert on your behalf, then follows the payment of fees. So anyway, I'll offer this up to you, not suggesting to you that this is where you want to go or need to go, but I'm telling you that it is an option. If you built it into the code, it would be built in upon a finding of a win. You have to win. If you don't win, you don't get any reimbursement.
What happens if it...
Can we just be careful? I'm sorry, Karen. Yeah. You're saying win, and what you mean is the allegation is dismissed, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
You have to
because
be successful.
Nobody wins in this whole thing.
The lawyers.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, that was said out loud. That's right. That's right. So successful in the presentation of your legal position.
And I would even go further to say that dismissals come about for the right reasons and the wrong reasons, and findings of ethical violations come about for the same set of reasons. So this is a mishmash of just bad stuff.
Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, don't get me wrong. Milton has some experience with allegations of ethical impropriety, and I will tell you, irrespective of the outcome, it is not pleasant for anybody.
Steve?
I know I don't think it's any secret to any of you, but I'm the one that brought this forward. And my concern is that we could grind things to a standstill here with complaints, ethics complaints that don't quite make it to the frivolous level, but are a couple of grades above that, that will never survive the challenge. I'm concerned that as council members, and I think it actually applies to staff as well, that we could just get twisted up in ethics complaints that don't hit that frivolous level where you could then go after the person that's filing the complaint. I believe that the city has a duty and responsibility to all of you and to all of the officials here that fall under it to be able to protect us from those types of complaints.
And I can speak from experience. Early on, I was doing my job is, what I had as the city along with staff, what was reasonable business, but, had an ethics complaint, which was, in my opinion, frivolous and later was deemed that. But again, I'm sure it was $4,000 or $5,000 I spent out of my pocket to do my job, as elected here in the city. So I certainly understand it puts undue strain on, financial strain on someone that's, let's face it, we're doing this for the benefit of the community. Hopefully we don't do this, we don't get paid enough to support, big lawyer bills. So, Bill?
I'm in the same fraternity, as you well know, Joe. Had the dubious distinction of being the first to be charged with an ethics violation after being in office for about 3 months. Went all the way up to the state, and within the course of about 33 and a half seconds, the state dismissed it. I guess the question is, what you're proposing is kind of a liability policy or action to assume the liability of paying for legal fees if the case is not, or if the case is dismissed. How would that be funded, and what other jurisdictions in the state have the same policy?
Can't tell you all the other jurisdictions in the state that have it. I haven't researched that. I can tell you that Forsyth County has it and has used it a handful of times, maybe 4 or 5. The city would fund it out of its general fund. That would be the way it's funded, and typically there's a cap on it. In the Forsyth County ordinance, it's $10,000 or less, no more. You could obviously set that amount lower or higher. My experience has been is that most of these cases cost between $2,000 and $3,000. They're just not that significant. Now, I will also tell you that there is a difference between, remember, the ethics ordinances are very similar. So there is an initial investigatory review by the panel to look and see if even the allegations set forth in the complaint give rise to a bona fide ethical violation. And typically by that time, the official has lawyered up, because it's typically their lawyer that will write the response that then the ethics panel will look at to see if there's even a claim worthy of going to a hearing. If it's shut down then, I think you're right. I think I'm right. It's going to be in the $2,000 to $3,000 range. If it goes to a full evidentiary hearing where the panel acts as a true judge and jury, it's going to cost more. I would expect that would be in the 7 to 8 to even 10 range. But again, I don't see that as much because a lot of the complaints get shut down at the initial investigatory review.
And I think it's important to, if we are to, add this, that we word it correctly for the true intent. As our city manager said, it's not, into the public comment we had, it's not a blanket insurance policy. You can just go out and act recklessly. It's got to be very, precise that it's only if it's a frivolous suit, and that, the elected official, whoever it covers, not to use your term win, but is, dismissed, or it's not that is frivolous, and it's not, if the elected official or whoever else did actually do something that was unethical, that they certainly need to bear the burden of it.
Yes, because, as I mentioned in the Yates case, what that case says is you have to be successful before there is the right or the obligation of the government to pay. If you're not successful, in fact, that case,
said that. I just want to make sure
that
we
case even goes so
clarify
far
that
to say if
intent.
they bring 7 counts against you and they only find they're only successful in 1, you still wouldn't be entitled. You have to basically be mindful of Councilman Longoria's admonition. You have to be very successful in asserting your defense.
I'd certainly support it, having gone through what I did, and it's not like we're making the big bucks up here, and one case can negate anything that we're compensated for in the normal course of what we're doing. Like you say, $3,000 to $4,000 is pretty much typical from what I've heard in the circuit that I've been in.
It is, and and in most legal issues that the council faces, either your city attorney represents you or a retained insurance counsel represents you. But these are a unique class of situations where you literally are going to be unrepresented. You will have nobody unless you do it yourself. And candidly, some of these allegations can be, not in Milton that I've seen yet, but they can be very seriously. I mean, Milton's ethics code is like most of them. I mean, there can be recommendations to the district attorney, depending upon the egregiousness of the conduct.
So, Ken, remind me what the difference is between a ethics violation that would be brought up to the city level panel versus something that would be brought up to the state level. Because I want to make sure are we talking about just the city level stuff in this? Okay.
Yeah, you are. I mean, what you typically look at when you talk about state level ethics is going to be allegations of impropriety related to the conduct of your campaigns.
Okay.
Those are primarily the things that are going to be cut up.
further to the point where this might encourage reckless conduct of an elected official, I can only speak on my part that I certainly wouldn't want to go through that process again. And I don't think anybody else would if they were charged with a frivolous action like that. But there again, there are folks out there that have no respect for the law and ethical conduct, and those are the ones that ought to be burned.
Right.
I'll make a case as well. I think obviously we want the election process to be full, and people take advantage of that. If there is a risk where people try to come in and lead and someone might file an ethics violation, we want all demographics to consider running as well. And if there is a risk that someone might file an ethics complaint, it could cost them a financial burden on that for them trying to do something or initiate change in the city. I think that there needs to be, if they did something wrong, of course, by all means, they should pay. But if they didn't, then, the very fact that we might have those costs for representation could deter people from even thinking about running. So
I think that Milton has done a commendable job, particularly by switching to the panel system away from the board. It has nothing to do with the decent civic mindedness of the board that was so. They were great folks. But I'll tell you, I've watched the panels work now, comprised of typically 3 attorneys chosen from outside the jurisdiction, selected at random, and very, very effective. And it's not for the faint of heart. They look very, very strong. They take their obligations very seriously, and so please do not, don't think for a minute that anything we're talking about here had to have any watering down effect. Your ordinance is a tough one, and the panel system is a rigorous one.
So Ken, if and again, thank goodness that I'm not more familiar with this particular part of our ordinances, but a complaint can be lodged by multiple individuals for the same reason. Do they somehow accumulate, and does it only represent a single instance? The reason I'm asking such a strange question is because it's one thing to assist in frivolous complaints against city officials who, through nothing other than being elected, become the target of such kind of things.
Right.
So I get that.
Okay.
But I'm trying to reconcile the whole idea of, and I don't know exactly how to say this, if something happens multiple times, in other words, you can have a habitual situation where somebody's getting complaints all the time.
Right.
And that's like this nightmare case where all of a sudden the city, sure, they all end up being frivolous, but there's something going on that's creating this environment where we are dealing with frivolous lawsuits. And the reason I even asked that question is because I'm trying to figure out, do we need to have, in addition to a cap, some type of a annual limit? I'm trying to think in terms of medical insurance, where you've only got so many times that you can be sick or something like that. I don't know. Is there anything that you could add there?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the ordinance is up to you to decide the parameters of it. I mean, the notion of perhaps a cap or maybe an annual aggregate. I would hate to think that any council member would blow through their entire aggregate. I mean, the reality is we would hope that there'll be no ethics complaints filed against any of you. And again, my experience is that in other jurisdictions, you're not getting into those issues of sort of almost like a recidivism issue is what you're raising.
Right.
That maybe each individual's situation results in dismissal, but there's sort of a smoke, there's fire argument going on. Right. That there's just enough. The best I have there for you is that that's difficult to draft an ordinance to capture, and that's maybe one of the things that you sort of know it when you see it, and we might have to take additional action at the council level to resolve that. I just don't know how to say that. Because I could see the public official saying, well, how can you come after me when I have been successful in every defense I have mounted against every complaint? Yeah, but why are they always directed at you? Because I'm a polarizing figure. That's why. You know, and you can be polarizing and not unethical.
Well, I think a lot of ethics complaints are more political than they are ethical in nature. And I think that's what we're trying to avoid, is to make sure that, you know, you don't end up having to go out of pocket for a complaint that's really political more so than it is ethical.
That is not the first time a public servant has said that exact same thing.
What?
Exactly.
I just want to point out one thing, just because there is a remedy for frivolous. It would something that would fall above frivolous but be unfounded, because there is a remedy for a complaint that is deemed frivolous, and that would be that you could actually, the city can go after the person that made the frivolous complaint and be reimbursed not only for the attorney's fees but also for any costs associated with convening the panel.
Okay.
I don't know what the level of proof of creating that would be, but the reason that I want to bring this forward is something that would come above that frivolous level, but something that falls below anything that's truly credible.
And I will tell you that's difficult to do. I mean, to go after one of your citizens and seek that. I mean, you have to have a fairly egregious set of facts. But the notion here is simply, if you prevail, and what does prevail look like? A dismissal. A dismissal with no findings of any unethical conduct.
Do you think there's adequate number of codes out there that address this in the state, that we could come up with some just template?
I do.
And do you think this? Do you think the extent of any code like this is pretty much confined to a couple pages rather than a comprehensive land use document?
Right, I do. I mean, you know, if we wanted to add language like this, it's a couple of paragraphs. It's not that much language. What I would propose to you, Councilman Lusk and Mr. Mayor, if you're agreeable, is maybe as part of the next step, provide you some examples of this language so you all could read what some other jurisdictions have done, and then you could say, okay, well, that makes sense, that doesn't, like this, like that. Maybe just some elements of what this looks like.
And I would imagine it would come from some of the larger jurisdictions. I'm not sure Ludowici, Georgia has ethics.
That's where we'd start, would be the major metro areas.
Okay, is everybody all right with that?
Augusta, Savannah.
Yep.
Okay.
Good deal.
Thank you.
All right, hit the road, Josh.
Get on the road.
Well, I tell you, I appreciate that, but I think I may need to stick around for one more, because we had a conference call on it this morning, so I hate to leave before we get through that. So forgive me. Then I'll get out of here.
Just on the.
Could we go kind of out of order again and hit the original number 2?
Yeah, the rural development.
Yes, please.
Okay, Sue, if you'll call that one.
Discussion on rural development and community safety, Chief Bob Ecken.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Oddly enough, we're here to talk about rural development and community safety and the application of our current fire codes. On a regular basis, the department and the Fire Marshal's office meets with developers to discuss our current fire codes as well as the application of sustainable water supplies, i.e. fire hydrants. So what I'd like to do this evening is just go through our current fire codes, and I'm going to call our expert up here, Matt Marietta, our fire marshal, to go over and review the codes with you and just discuss some of the issues that we've been dealing with and what we've been doing. But I just wanted to touch on our department's strategic goals, and basically what this comes down to is our mission and our goal here of the protection of life and property within the community. So I'm going to turn this over to Matt and let him jump right into the codes.
Good evening. Let's see how this thing works. There we go. Okay, I wanted to start off with the state law and how I derive the code system that I work off of. This comes from OCGA Title 25, and it basically says the county governing authority in any county with a population of 100,000 or more, or a municipality with more than 45,000,
has to adopt and enforce the minimum state fire safety standards as promulgated by the State Fire Marshal's Office. With one caveat under number 2, the State Fire Marshal retains responsibilities for hospital, nursing homes, jails, ambulatory health care centers, penal institutions, and state-owned buildings. So that's for counties with over 100,000 and municipalities with over 45. And the expectations are that we'll conduct inspections of existing buildings and structures, which we do, review plans and specifications for proposed buildings and structures, and issue permits, and conduct inspections of those new construction or alterations, which we do, and issue temporary and permanent certificates of occupancy, which we do through the building department. The only place where I would actually issue a certificate of occupancy is in the schools, because they're actually allowed to contract with a third party to provide their building function. Only the fire marshal has any say over Fulton County schools, and that's through a memorandum of understanding that they issued to all of the municipalities after they got out of the local government business in the North Fulton area, at least. I don't know if they still do it in the South. Moving on, there's also a subsection B that addresses municipalities having less than 45,000. It says that municipalities with fewer than 45,000 residents can enforce the minimum state standards if they issue a resolution to the state that says that we're going to take that responsibility on. We have one of those resolutions as of September 6, 2007. So we have taken the responsibility of enforcing the minimum fire safety standards as promulgated by the State Fire Marshal's Office in the city of Milton. And if you guys have any questions on this, by all means, stop me. I will say also in reference to this, I did a little bit of last-minute research today, and Union City, Palmetto, Fairburn, and College Park all have reference to enforcing the minimum fire safety standards in their jurisdiction, and they're all less than 45,000. For the fire code overview, just to give you an idea of the rule books that I'm playing with, per Title 25, the State Fire Marshal has several different code books that we operate out of, and it depends on what circumstances they're applied in as to what code we look at. The primary one is the Life Safety Code from NFPA. There's also the International Fire Code. Life Safety Code has to do a lot with building. International Fire Code looks more at site design and things like outdoor burning regulations and so on. The International Building Code is specifically for me used in reference to sprinklers and where they're required. There's also several specialized supplemental codes, and then there's 152 pages of Georgia amendments where they took something in one of those codes and changed it. So it becomes something of a scavenger hunt. Sometimes when somebody calls up with a specific code question, you have to go and make sure it hasn't been edited and make sure you're looking in the right code. We also are supposed to enforce federal ADA standards, and then there's additional standards governing explosives and the fireworks issue and so on that we dealt with recently. Then we also have local ordinances on outdoor burning, commercial fire sprinkler requirements, and so on. Excuse me. The fire code that I have to enforce is not one size fits all. It recognizes that communities are different. Not every community looks exactly the same, and it gives different prescriptive options on how to deal with the fire problem in a community. And it specifically addresses topography and other constraints in development. Within the code, there are many different ways to meet the state fire regulations while still encouraging rural development. The three main areas of consideration, though, that we're operating with in the fire department is the code requirements, which I just gave you the foundation for. There's also ISO and insurance requirements, which we deal with on a regular basis, where insurance companies call up and new citizens moved in. They want to know what the ISO rating is, and we can either tell them they're a 2 or they're a 2X, and then explain what that means to the citizens of the insurance company when they call. And then we also have practical considerations. What can we do? What do we have the equipment to do? We've been through this before when we've talked about ISO and their expectation of the number of stations in the city. And sometimes that's just not financially feasible to give them everything they want. So within the confines of our ability as a local government, There's only certain things that we can do. And then also, we're also governed by the science of fire and new building construction techniques and so on. Specific to this issue, the state amendments to the 2012 International Fire Code, which is the currently adopted fire code, require an approved fire apparatus access road. And the reason I start with roads is because this access and then hydrants are tied to roads. Water supply is tied to roads. Shall be provided for every building, facility, or building or portion of a building constructed or moved within the jurisdiction as determined by the local fire chief or the fire code official of the responding agency. The road shall extend within 150 feet as measured by an approved route around the exterior of the building or facility. Now, we define those terms as to what a fire apparatus access road is in our current code. It says that was the minimum of 20 feet wide. I know if y'all remember when I brought you the picture of the truck with the outriggers out over the grass. But we didn't define in that code what that road needs to look like. So if it's pavers or if it's some kind of a gravel road or something like that, it's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. We just need to be able to get there. The 2 points I really want to draw a point to, because it'll figure in later, is the fire apparatus access roads cannot be installed. There's exceptions, excuse me. We're allowed to grant a increase in the dimension of 150 feet where the building is equipped throughout with a automatic sprinkler system. If topography, waterways, non-negotiable grades, or other conditions are causing a hardship and an approved alternative means of fire protection is provided, or there are not more than 2 Group R3 or Group U occupancies. Now, Group R3 is a single-family residence. They're contained within there. So that's basically what exempts me from saying you've got a 10-acre parcel. You have to put a fire hydrant on your personal lot if you want to build a house at the back of that parcel. So if there's just 1 or 2 lots being traced off of that property in that development, then I basically don't have any say in it. It's your own responsibility. You're taking it upon yourself. There are practical considerations as to whether we can provide fire service in those locations, and ISO recognizes that. The IFC also requires an approved water supply capable of supplying the required fire flow for fire protection. The water supply shall consist of reservoirs, pressure tanks, elevated tanks, water mains, or other fixed systems capable of providing the required fire flow. And just to give you a quick overview, this is the table that we use. This is the approved means that we use to determine whether or not there's sufficient fire flow. And if you look across the top, it has Type 1A, Type 2B, Type 2A. Those are all building types. A Type 1 building is non-combustible, protected. Type 2 is limited combustible, basically the kinds of buildings that we have across the street from us, 13010 Morris Road. A Type 3 is ordinary construction, like a business with brick on the outside. Type 4 is heavy timber. You'll see that in a lot in like churches or something with a great big beam supporting the building. And then a Type 5 is a wood frame. It's your standard residential construction. And you'll notice the way this table is written. These are all square footages, these numbers. And the non-combustible buildings can go bigger without requiring a greater water flow, if you want to follow me on that one. So if you're made out of wood, you're going to have more water available because the code assumes that it's more likely to burn than a steel structure. So a 3,000, a house that's less than 3,600 square feet is expected to have 1,500 gallons per minute of water available. A 9,401 square foot house to an 11,300 square foot house is expected to have 2,700 gallons a minute available for a flow duration of 2 hours. I'll come back to that a little bit later just to give you an idea of what we have as far as what we use on a regular fire that we go on. Here's where the specific water requirements come. Where a portion of the facility or building is moved within the jurisdiction is more than 500 feet, and this is a Georgia amendment. It actually says 400 feet in the International Fire Code. as measured on a fire department apparatus access road, as measured on an approved route, on-site fire hydrant main shall be provided where required by the local fire code official. Exceptions, again, the same exception for Group R3 and U occupancies. So it increases the distance. And then again, for buildings equipped throughout with a sprinkler system. So those are the basic code requirements that I'm looking at when I do a site plan review for a new construction. If it's only two lots, I look and see if there's a hydrant on the main roadway going through, then I don't pay any further attention to it. If it's going to be more than 3 lots, if there's a subdivision going in, then I'm going to be trying to make sure that the main thoroughfare of that subdivision, not the individual lots, but the main thoroughfare of that subdivision has water supply so we can put the fire out if the house catches on fire or get in with an ambulance or whatever other service that we need to provide. I want to touch on the ISO requirements. They actually have a little bit of a different threshold. Their requirement is a water supply within 1,000 feet. Anything outside of 1,000 feet, that's going to be what is going to be considered the 2X in our category, or basically unprotected. Even though we have a fire department and we will go and we will do the best possible, ISO recognizes that it becomes more difficult for us to actually put a stop on the fire, and they're more likely to lose the house. And then as a bullet point to that, we only carry 1,000 feet of supply line on our engines. That's a lot of 5-inch hose to lay down the middle of the roadway. That's where the 2X rating that we currently have comes from. And they would actually consider properties outside of 1,000 feet individually classed as 2X by themselves. And then anybody that's within 1,000 feet is going to be a rated 2. Citizens and insurance companies call regularly, and the people in the subdivisions or in subdivisions expect that fire protection. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, that's our hydrant map. It's a little small right now. I think it's also on the GIS file on the city website, or I can provide any of this if you guys want email copies of it. But most of the city, I believe in the 2010 ISO evaluation, they said 82% of our city was covered in hydrants. I think it's gone up since then. I estimate 85% is covered in hydrants in this, but it's probably closer to 90%. I couldn't find the exact number. But the majority of the city has a hydrant on it. So we have that water supply available. The fire code, the national standards that ISO based on are not arbitrary. They're based on scientific research. And our station locations and equipment and staffing are arranged around these needs to meet the scientific realities of firefighting. The hydrant system itself in the city of Milton is not ours. We're under the auspices of Fulton County Water, so the hydrants belong to them. However, they don't have any say as to where they're installed. All they care about is that they're installed properly. Also, one other point, Milton firefighters conduct annual testing of every single fire hydrant in the city to make sure when we crank the nut on the top of it, the water comes out. And that's as much for the city's protection as it is for ours. We don't want to be running around looking for a fire hydrant that actually works when somebody's house is on fire. So we take great care to do that annually. So just to give you an idea of Milton's typical water needs, a deck gun or a master stream device takes 350 to 1,250 gallons a minute. A deck gun sits up on top of the fire engine, or it's on the top of the ladder. If you ever see the trucks with the ladder pipes up and they're raining water down on a fire, it's running anywhere from 350 to 1,250 gallons a minute. 3 hand lines run 60 to 200 gallons a minute each. And 1 portable master stream device, which is like the deck gun, except it sits on the ground. We'll use that to protect houses next door from catching on fire. Runs 500 gallons a minute. I just pulled out some numbers to give you an average of what we would pull out on a fire. That's 1,690 gallons a minute. And mind you, the durations on that chart that I just showed you was for 2 hours. We're flowing 1,690 gallons a minute from more than 1 engine generally. And by the way, our engines only carry 750 gallons of water. So we're pretty much out of water in the first minute or so that we're on a fire. Now, this is going back into that chart that I showed you earlier to show you now the flowing 3 hand lines and 2 deck guns is a fairly standard practice for us on a structure fire, and that's providing 1,690 a minute. And that's on the lower end of this scale. This is just for smaller residents, less than 4,000 square foot range. We're putting in a lot of houses in the 7,000, 8,000 square foot range. And so we, as a fire department, have to look for a way to try to respond to that issue. So we're trying to buy equipment and formulate our strategic long-term plan to make sure that we're moving in a direction that's able to address this problem so we can serve the citizens. But at the same time, we have to realize the limitations of our staffing and our equipment and try to deal with the built environment as well, which is where the fire hydrants come in. Again, we carry 1,000 feet of supply line in our engines. We have the ability to draft off of a static water source. That means we can stick a straw down in a pond and pull water up out of it if we have to. There's only a certain height, distance, and a proximity to the pond that we need to be able to get that water, though. We can't be a long way away from it. So if the pond sits right next to the driveway, then we can draft water. If it doesn't, then we're, again, looking for a water supply. And we have very limited water abilities with only 750 gallons in the tank. We have one engine with 1,000 gallons in the tank. Again, at 1690 a minute plus, that's not lasting very long. And the more time we spend, and I've got all that spaghetti laying out on the ground to show you what it looks like on most of our structure fires, and that's actually a fairly simple fire. The more time we spend establishing water supply and trying to find a hydrant that works and laying out 1,000 feet of hose on the ground, the less time we are rescuing citizens and putting their fire out. I think I showed this one before, but there's two different rooms. It's comparing legacy room, which is how we used to build houses, including with air flow in and out of the house, and old furniture made out of wool and so on, carpet made out of wool as opposed to synthetics. It takes, and flashover is at the point where everything reaches ignition temperature and the entire building is on, or entire room is on fire. In a legacy fire, it can take up to 30 minutes to reach flashover. With our modern furnishings, what they did is they took two different rooms and set them up side by side, and one of them had modern furnishings, one had legacy furnishings in it. With the modern furnishings, because we make so much with plastic and petroleum-based products and so on now, it took 3 minutes and 40 seconds to go to flashover. Our buzzer's just ringing at that point if you have a fire alarm in your house. Now put the travel time driving down the road, and then we get there and we're running around trying to find a hydrant so we can get in there. We're starting to push not only saving the house, but we're pushing rescuing somebody if they're trapped in there. So what we're looking at in the fire code is trying to maximize our ability to provide the best service possible within the limitations that the system gives us. Over the past 8 years, we've had access and maneuvering problems on fires and other emergencies. We've also had significant water problems at fires in the past. We have one total loss on New Bullpen Road in May 2008. It actually describes in the incident narrative that it was a narrow bridge and the firefighters had to get out in the middle of the night with flashlights and make sure that the fire truck wasn't going to fall off the bridge trying to get back to the residents. And there was no water supply available. We've had two fires at Chadwick. Recent one where both Cherokee and Forsyth County came in mutual aid for us and spent 16 hours shuttling 278,000 gallons of water from fire hydrants either in Cherokee County or down at Ranchette Road, because those are the closest two hydrants to that development. And then we've had several other fires where we've had to relay pump, which is lay out 1,000 feet of hose, set up another engine and lay out another 1,000 feet of hose and set up another engine to actually fight the fire. Well, that process takes a lot of time to get in place. Harken back to the 3 minutes and 40 seconds to the room going to flashover. Again, we're going to do everything we can to help people, but by that time, it's probably a loss on the house, and we're protecting exposures and making sure that we've rescued or rendered medical aid. I just turned it off. Roadway widths are relevant to us. We want to make sure that we can get there and somebody's in their most dire need. And again, that's the picture from the roadway width conversation as well. This is the fire report that I was talking about, May 23rd, 2008. we could actually see the fire from the fire station. And the personnel used all the water on board while they waited for Cherokee County to show up to support us, because we had no way to provide any water. None of these standards, though, say that we cannot both meet the rural development vision of Milton and protect the community. Hydrant systems can be used. It actually goes down the list of different ways. We could draft off of a pond. It has something called a dry hydrant, which is a pipe that's stuck into the pond if there's a water supply available. You can use cisterns. A raised water tank can meet the needs. Homes can be limited to fit the size of, home sizes can be limited to fit the available water resources, and so on. And I personally always welcome the development community to come in and talk to me. Let's try to find a way to make this fit what you're trying to accomplish. So I realize this is not a one-size-fits-all, and I also understand Milton's development goals and do my best to work within it, balancing out all of these other factors. Drives, and one point that I want to make, drives and minor plats with only one or two homes on them are specifically exempted by the code, but practical considerations of water supply, road widths, and time still have an impact, and the individual homeowners assume the risk and understand possibly when they buy the house that they're assuming the risk because they want to live on a rural environment, but they still also expect us to show up and serve them when their house catches on fire. Yes?
To that point, then, on resales, are the new buyers advised of that situation?
At this point, no, and that could be something that we could address, even as far as just to make sure that it's available on our website if they want to come find the information, because this isn't a specific issue to Milton. There's 2x, 3x, properties that have individually rated homes all over the place.
Yeah, that would be reflective, though, on their insurance policies, correct?
Yes, that should show up on their insurance policy.
If someone's doing their due diligence, they're buying a house, and typically they'll say we want to see utility costs, taxes, and insurance and whatnot, and that might raise a flag.
Well,
I think the forms you fill out actually have to state where your closest water supply is and things like that as far as for a fire, because I just went through that.
And we get phone calls from insurance companies all the time saying, we have a client that lives at this address, can you tell us what the closest hydrant is? And we do that for them. And many times that there's hydrants that are just not close enough. So beyond that 1,000-foot mark that we use as an ISO rating.
And again, that's not to say if you're over 1,000 feet that you're on your own. We're going to do everything we can, but these aren't just arbitrary codes. They're set by the practical limitations of what we're capable of doing. And creative use of equipment and staffing can be used to alleviate these practical concerns, but not necessarily the insurance issues. That's actually driven by the individual insurance companies. I believe some of them just call up and see that we have a 2 on there and they run with that. They don't look any deeper into it. It's probably more the large loss fires where their insurance agents actually dig really deep into where the hydrant is located and so on. Again, we try to err on the side of Milton's development goals and all of the above approaches used. Hydrant systems are by far the most reliable. To provide 2,000 gallons a minute from a hydrant is, for a duration of 2 hours, is a very regular occurrence. To be able to provide 2,000 gallons a minute or 2,000 gallons a minute from a cistern or a raised water tank is a 300,000, 400,000 gallon tank. So it becomes a little bit more challenging. The larger the house is, the bigger the water supply needs to be, the bigger tank or cistern we're talking about. Or if we're going to draft off a pond, the bigger the pond has to be. And that's because we turn the water on and the water comes out of the hydrant, whereas if it's a pond, drought may impact whether there's water available or so on. Rural development patterns do present a challenge even for the minor plats, but we still have an expectation of service from these residents looking at access, water supply, and rescue. Yes?
What exactly about the rural development patterns are you talking about? Is it the homes, what about, is the homes being far away? Is it 1 acre lots?
Yeah, it's the access to back into the lot. The farther back it is, the harder it is for us to be able to provide.
It's harder to find a hydrant that meets all the needs of one
Yeah. And it's one thing if we're looking at a subdivision street going in to say, well, you need to put hydrants on the street. But somebody sits 3,000 feet down a windy driveway and they want to live out in the country, all the more power to them. Then they're welcome to that. But we also have to find ways as a fire department to be able to work around that on the inevitable, because our job is to think worst case scenario. We like to plan for the different potentialities given what we have here, the kind of development that we have here in Milton. And so we practice laying out and doing these relay pumps and other things because we've recognized the unique character of the development that we have that maybe Roswell or Sandy Springs wouldn't be facing because of their industrial or more densely developed state. Let me put it that way. So that's not a dig or a negative on the type of development. It's just different, and we have to approach it slightly differently. And I think that's it. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Too, and what really has driven this is, we're all talking about development, rural development, and whatnot, and obviously from the fire side, their number one job and focus is to do the best thing they can, get our ISO ratings down. You guys are doing an excellent job. But what we're running into is people that may have a larger piece of property that want to develop one home, two homes, or whatever. Well, in order to help meet the fire codes, they'd have to put a lot of infrastructure in. And, to Matt's point, with fire hydrants and this and that. So all of a sudden it's driving them to, well, we're going to need to put more homes in to offset the cost of that. So, again, it's working against what, most everybody's trying to work too. So trying to come up with kind of a blend where, it doesn't penalize the whole city, with higher fire costs and ISO ratings, but also allow someone to develop in a very rural way that has a reasonable, cost that they can get some semblance of protection. But again, as we're taught, they have to realize that they're not going to get the same protection that somebody, that lives right down the street here where there's plenty of fire hydrants and whatnot. Is that kind of hitting the head? And you guys are looking for us to give a little direction on which way.
And our goal here was to bring this to you to know where our limitations are and what guidelines we follow as you're looking at development. That these are some considerations that we have to look at when we see the developments and that look at the plans. That do we have a sustainable water supply if this home ever catches fire? And the fear is that people go into these developments and these homes, well, it's never going to happen. But we don't look at it like that. We look at it, yes, it's going.
You guys wouldn't have a job if it was.
Let me ask you a question. Are you seeing this happen with zoning as it exists today currently, or are you expecting these challenges as we discuss?
We have seen it.
So we are seeing it now. So we haven't changed anything, and you're seeing it now.
And we've had some meetings, and I had asked the fire department to put something together, and I just want to make sure I get my money's worth of keeping Ken here. So we were going back and forth through this, and obviously the question that I'm sure that would came to my mind: what do we have to do, and where do we have flexibility? Are we governed under state law that requires us to have a fire hydrant within 600 feet of the residence, or is that a best practice? So we're trying to sift through what this truly is, and this is what we were able to come to the conclusion today. Because, and jump in if I'm making any mistakes, because we signed on back in 2008 to enforce the state regulations as written. Currently, we are required to enforce at those levels. We are required, if you're going to have 3 or more houses, we are required to have a fire hydrant or a subtype of stationary water source that can deliver those numbers that we were looking at per minute, which really, you're talking about a cistern or a tank that is just tremendous. I can't imagine how that could ever be cost effective. However, that being said, if just from the same stroke of the pen that you did in 2008, the same stroke of the pen can now decouple us from that. And we would no longer be required to enforce those state regulations. i.e. be within 600 feet of that static water source. So what we had asked Ken to do was, first of all, we want to make sure that we're understanding this correctly, and we do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, what I've said is basically the case. Right. But we also want to know, let's say we do decouple ourselves from this. What are the implications? I mean, beyond safety. I mean, what we're basically asking the fire department to would probably be akin to asking me to, raise all the speed limits to 70 miles an hour in the city. So we just would want to know, what is it that we are trying to do here? What do we want to do? Because you can now get what you're looking for in the development. You can get the 5-6 acre lots, like I think that one of the developers is looking to do, without having to spend the fixed cost of that infrastructure if we decouple from that. Of course, you have the risks that Matt just brought about to us.
So if we decoupled, you're saying?
If.
My position would be in the interest of allowing people or promoting or incentivizing them to develop with larger lots. And it's just my opinion, I would be willing to push as far as we comfortably can go to that, as long as we were very specific, communicated, and that people that elect to do that know the risks and, the certain things they have to take on that, in order to do that. So.
I'm going to ask a question that may not be popular, but is clustering homes together, would that help with regards to being within the realms of your concerns?
I'd have to assume the proximity to a static source is key. So if you have those homes close to a source, I guess it would.
But it'll also ignite the next time and the next one.
No. I mean, to me, under what set of circumstances could not supporting state law, in other words, decoupling, how on earth would decoupling ever be viewed as the wise and correct decision?
Yeah, I agree with that.
This is for the decision.
I can't imagine that scenario, because all it's going to take is some accident that happens where we don't respond the way we could have responded, and this will all get dug up and somebody will say, what short-sighted politician made that decision?
Now, what you can consider also is there a sweet spot in here somewhere? Maybe there are ways we can somehow, I'm just throwing stuff out. We talked about this at our meeting. There's a way we could subsidize or partially subsidize or match something on infrastructure to encourage this kind of development. Can we offer tax credits? I'm just,
I was going to ask, a part of our impact fee goes toward Parks and Rec, which is somebody who lives on a 5-acre thing probably may not need as much parks. And I think part of it goes to public safety. Is there a way to waive part of the impact fees related to public safety into Parks and Rec if they have houses on certain size subdivisions? I mean, certain size lots?
I think the problem with that is that I don't recall that any of the impact fee in the CIE was associated with infrastructure type installation. So there are some specific items that are related to what that impact fee could be charged for.
But I know that there were ways that we could give credits back for
There
it.
are-
So
there
can we
are-
look
there-
at that and just see if
There are
because
ways to give credits, but typically it has to be because the developer is providing some sort of a system improvement that otherwise is eligible for a credit because it's something we otherwise don't have to build.
But the person who develops a home that's so far back on the property that we can't get to a hydrant within 1,000 feet should put a hydrant 1,000 feet from his property.
It's almost what you call a self-imposed
Well,
hardship.
and that's why I would respectfully disagree that, by decoupling, we're opening ourselves up. It's not like it'd be, now I would agree if we decide as elected body to cut the fire budget and cut the equipment and everything that dealt, citywide. But I think, when someone chooses, I mean, I'll use myself, for example. I live on a piece of property way back off the road. There are certain things that I know I've got higher risks. Maybe it's crime, maybe obviously it's fire, fire protection, things like that. And that's why I said, obviously it would need to be communicated, but it would be one of those things, because what we're seeing is somebody coming in with, say, 10 acres or 20 acres saying, hey, we want to build 2 homes on here. But then when they go through the process and they realize, and I was gonna ask the question on the numbers, where they gotta spend $50,000 or $100,000 to bring a fire, they're like, nah, you know, we're not gonna do that, we're just gonna have to break it up into 10 lots to offset the cost of that. So I think, you know, from my perspective, it's not something that we are doing, it's, look at the flip side, it's promoting, if someone chooses to do that, it allows them to develop less dense if they want.
Can I weigh in on
Sure.
on another option too? There's been a couple of instances in the past, and this is a bad word, so I'm not allowed to say it, but it's the S word, sprinklers. And I want to harken back to the code requirements on roadways, because the hydrant location is all driven by their positioning on